Good evening, everyone. I would like to call this special board meeting to order. We meet tonight from many different locations in the unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Algonquin people. And I would like to thank Algonquin for hosting us on their land. Could I have a motion for approval of the agenda, please?
I will.
Trustee Campbell, seconded by Trustee Boothby. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the question then on the agenda. All those in favor, please. And opposed? And the motion is carried. I will go then to Vice Chair Penny for his report from Committee of the Whole in camera.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The board met in camera this evening and reports and recommends as follows. Moved on a motion by Trustee Campbell, which I will second, that the tentative agreement between OCDSB and the PSSP, which will form a collective agreement dated 1st September 2019 to 31st August 2022, be ratified.
And just for the benefit of those who who stumble with acronyms, PSSP is the Professional Student Services Personnel. So we have had our debate in camera, and the recommendation is before us. I would like, if there is no further discussion, to ask Manager Guthrie, please, to conduct a recorded vote.
Trustee Boothby.
In favor.
Trustee Blackburn.
In favor.
Trustee Howe.
In favor.
Trustee Campbell.
In favor.
Trustee Ellis.
In favor.
Trustee Jennings.
In favor.
Trustee Penny.
In favor.
Trustee Lyra.
In favor.
Trustee Bell.
In favor.
Trustee Fisher.
In favor.
Trustee Schwartz.
I believe Trustee Schwartz is absent.
Trustee Scott.
In favor.
That is 11 in favor.
And I believe that is unanimous for those present. The motion is carried. Matters for information. We have no new matters for information for this special board meeting this evening, although I expect there will be plenty of new things to discuss in our Committee of the Whole public meeting, which will follow immediately. Having completed our agenda for the special board meeting, I declare this meeting adjourned. We will be reconvening for Committee of the Whole in camera on a different link momentarily.
Excuse me, Chair.
Did you mean out of camera?
Trustee Ellis?
We're starting the public cow immediately, or at 7:30 as the agenda says?
The agenda, I believe, said 6:30.
6:30, you're correct, yes.
So we're late. We're late, unfortunately, but yes, we will be starting as soon as we have quorum.
Okay. Thank you.
5 before 3 and 4. Is there any debate on that motion? And seeing none, I'd like to call a question on that motion. All those in favor of moving item 5 up for item 3 and 4? And opposed? and abstaining. And that motion passes. So the agenda is approved. Is there any more proposed changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
we've only approved the amendment. We haven't approved the agenda yet.
No, yeah, I see that, Madam Chair. I was just asking if there's any further possible changes to the agenda. And seeing no other proposed changes, I'd like to call a question on the approval of the agenda as amended. All those in favor? And opposed? And abstaining. And that passes. So given that we've amended the agenda, we're going to move directly to delegations. And tonight we have 7 delegations, 1 4-minute and 6 2-minute. And I do note that there is one person that has indicated that they cannot be present. And so we're going to move to there. I would request that because of the large number of delegations, that if trustees have questions, which is typical, which is allowed for delegations, that their questions of clarification truly are questions of clarification. I would humbly request that. So thank you very much. And with that, we'll move on to our 4-minute delegation, Jaden Crochet. And I do apologize if I mispronounced your name despite my best efforts. So go ahead, Jaden, you have 4 minutes to present your delegation.
Hi, I don't really know how this works, so I'm sorry if I sound nervous. My name is Jaden Croucher, which you know because he just said that. And I'm here to talk about the period pads and tampons in washroom movement. I'm a former student of SRB, so right now I'm not technically in the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. I'm in the Catholic School Board at St. Paul, but I went to SRB for 7th and 8th grade. And I was without pads more than once because there wasn't even pad machines to begin with in the intermediate section. And I would have to wrap my underwear in 1-ply toilet paper, which made for raging rashes, if anyone's wondering. And through all my period DIYs, I would go to the gender neutral washroom and see students taking condoms, blowing them up like water balloons and throwing them at each other. So let me ask, did we choose to have periods? No, because if anyone chose to have periods, no one would have periods. But do we choose to have sex? Yes. So I don't understand why condoms are free and available, yet pad and tampons are not. On top of the mad rashes, there's also a ton of shame. Thankfully now I'm shameless about my period. I could care less, who knows, but back in middle school, thinking about asking someone for a pad or a tampon, worse, faculty, any staff, that would give me a panic attack. And if we could simply just have pads and tampons in bathrooms, we could avoid a lot of issues. Another example, imagine sitting in a 75-minute classroom with 1-ply toilet paper in your underwear. And then every time you get up and worry about how you bled on your seat or on your pants or on your underwear. It sounds distracting, right? Thankfully, I'm blessed to live in a very financially stable home, but I know a lot of people, even in my community, who don't have that privilege, and they have to go through that experience of having wrapped underwear in these long, extreme classes. And having these pads and tampons available would make their school experience at least a little more comfortable. I personally got my period when I was 10 and I was in the 5th grade, and we didn't even have our sanitary waste disposal bin. So I would have to wrap up my pad and walk out to the garbage and throw it out in front of all of my friends. And I remember feeling this like horrible just guilt and shame that I was this disgusting pig. Now amplify that by like 1,000 for our trans and non-binary students, because imagine the pure gender dysphoria of having to ask or having to drop off their sanitary waste in the garbage in front of all their, friends. And I think having pads and tampons available in both of the bathrooms would alleviate their stress and their dysphoria and encourage them to use the washrooms more, And I know we here all want to make this a bearable school experience. And I think this would alleviate some of the stress in our lives. And that's why I'm here today, to ask for this one simple thing. That's all I have.
Thank you very much, Jaden, and really appreciate your delegation here this evening. And I'm just wondering if there's questions, and we do have one question from, from Trustee Bell. Did you wish to ask a question, Trustee Bell? I know your internet is intermittent.
Okay, I think it's working now. Yes, I'd like to ask a question for clarification. Thank you so much for your delegation tonight and for your vivid descriptions. I relate, my question to you is, you're not seeing it as an either or when it comes to condoms and period products, menstruation products, are you? You wouldn't necessarily say it would be an either or decision, hopefully. Could you clarify?
I'd say both of which would be very good. I find the condoms being available is great because I know a lot of students are sexually active, and having that shamelessly being able to just take one is amazing. And I find like I go to Catholic school now, and that would never, ever happen. So I really appreciate that does happen, at least at SRB. So I'm thinking along with the free condoms, there should also be tampons and pads.
Great, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And any further questions for the delegation? And seeing none, I'd like to thank you very much for your delegation. And we're going to move on to delegation, the second delegation, which, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, I'm sorry, is Ariana Vetsi. Are you there, Ariana? And I'm not hearing Ariana. I'm not seeing her. I'm not hearing her. So I'm assuming that we're going to move on. But if she does show up, I will get her in towards the end if there's an opportunity. The next delegation is someone who they said could not be present this evening. So we're going to move on to Lauren Kochi. Lauren, go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Good evening. Yes, my name is Lauren Koche, and I am a co-founder of Period Packs. We are an Ottawa-based organization focused on eradicating menstrual inequity, and we do that by providing direct access to period products, as well as menstrual and reproductive health education and anti-stigma awareness. And I'm here tonight to speak to the issue of menstrual inequity in support of the ME project motion brought forward by student trustees Joy and Charles. So I just wanted to say that the fact is that young people in Ottawa are experiencing physical, financial, and cultural barriers to accessing period products. This, like we just heard, is an undeniable problem and has been identified as such by institutions across Canada, including the provinces of BC, PEI, a little closer to home, cities of Hamilton and London, as well as the Toronto District School Board, among other school boards in Ontario, all of which have already approved policy changes on this issue. So barriers to accessing these essential hygiene products have negative ripple effects on our community members who menstruate, and in particular, our youth. According to Plan Canada's latest research, a study conducted in 2019, 1 in 3 Canadian menstruators under the age of 25 report facing barriers to accessing period products. And 2/3 report having missed an important activity because of their period, as I'm sure many of us here can relate to. This is all directly related to the amount of time that young people spend in the care of institutions, such as schools, where period products are currently not readily available. So I just wanted to be here on behalf of Period Packs and the ME project motion to say that the OCDSB has a chance to be a leader in Ottawa and across Canada on this issue right now by moving this motion forward. And I also wanted to stress that the City of Ottawa has deemed this issue a priority and is partnering with Period Packs throughout 2021 to champion a pilot program providing free menstrual products in city-run facilities. So our solution to this multifaceted issue of menstrual equity, it must be collaborative with alignment from school boards and municipalities as leaders to encourage broader federal change. So Period Packs is here today to support these incredible youth in your school board who are organizing these motions, sharing their stories, and are passionate about the issue of menstrual equity. So all they need is this committee to support them in approving this motion to create the positive, inclusive change they are asking to see in their schools. And that's it for me. Thanks again for the time this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about Period Packs, our pilot program, or menstrual equity in general if there's time. But if you do want to learn more afterwards, you can always visit our site, periodpacks.org, or follow us on Instagram or Twitter. Thanks again for the 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. And we're going to move to Trustee Lyra.
Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I know it can be intimidating to speak to a bunch of people. So my question to you is, I noted that you used trans-inclusive language the entire time. Can you elaborate on the importance of trans-inclusivity in the period destigmatization movement?
Absolutely. So a phrase that is, broadcast broadly in this movement is that not all menstruators are women and not all women menstruate. And it is so important to be using this trans-inclusive language because not all menstruators' experiences are the same. And I think how that directly relates to this motion and to school boards in general is to be sure to provide these products, not just to the girls, or in girls' bathrooms, but in gender neutral bathrooms and in male gendered bathrooms, because there are folks across the gender spectrum that need access to this. And part of the destigmatization of periods in general is ensuring that access is non-policed. And that means that they can access it wherever it is that they choose to use the washroom.
Thank you.
Does that fully answer your question, Lyra?
It does.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. And moving on to Trustee Campbell.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming this evening.
Sure.
I have one question which I think you're really well placed probably to comment on. I'm guessing. I don't know. I did some research with respect to the other DSB in Ontario that have engaged in similar measures, and maybe not entirely, but to the extent that I can suss that out online, they've pretty much all had partnerships with organizations perhaps like yours. And not yours, or your organization's name hasn't come up, but Diva International and Him for Hers, and there seems to be a whole slew of them out there. Are you aware, since you're aware of the other school boards, whether they, I know that Toronto publicly said there'd be no cost to the school board because of their partnership, but are you aware of what kinds of arrangements have been struck with other DSB with their respective partners on this kind of thing?
I don't have the full info on that, so I don't want to speak out of place. What I do know specifically around the province of British Columbia, because we did a lot of research into that, is that the province legislation itself has mandated school boards across the entire province to be providing these. So there's provincial funding being provided. And so I don't have answers to other school boards. I'm sure it's a bit of a case-by-case basis. But yeah, I think there's just more talks to see how this can be not just on the shoulders of school boards, but a more provincial and then hopefully federally mandated provision.
Okay, great. I don't just permitted a follow up, but this is not something in terms of the free provision, which I think you may have referred to. This is not something your own organization would necessarily venture into on the scale of a partnership with a large DSB, or would it? Or
We haven't had those conversations as of yet. We're partnering with the City of Ottawa. Right now, we are a fairly small scale organization, but we're open to making this happen one way or another. So if there's more conversations to be had with Period Packs, hit us up.
great, thank you.
Thank you very much. And the third set of questions come from, or the third question comes from Trustee Schwartz.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lauren, and also to the other delegates or delegations that are coming to speak on this issue tonight. I think I'm certainly, as someone who faced a lot of these issues when I was in school and not having access to products. It's only, I think, expanded as we've been now more aware of transgendered equity issues and so on. And so I'm certainly really thrilled that our student trustees have been championing this issue. So Lauren, my question to you, and it follows on what Trustee Campbell was talking about, but as a woman, I'm just wondering, there's often preferred products that are used, and so. And I know when, those old 25-cent machines that you see in the women's washrooms at shopping malls and so on often have products that you don't want to get close to. So I'm just wondering, are we talking about specific products in particular that would be made available through either through your organization, or are we talking predominantly pads that would be sort of distributed in these settings? I'm just trying to get a better sense, because that also there's sort of cost implications for those depending on the items.
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple angles to this answer, so I'll try my best to keep it brief. I think first off, something very important to Period Packs in particular is to provide a range of products to allow folks full autonomy over what's going to work best for their cycle and for their bodies. So that means, in the very least, I would recommend providing both pads and tampons. Something that we are doing also is we've been forming corporate sponsorships with a menstrual cup providers, companies, because that's, of course, a more sustainable solution, but is not always right for every menstruator. So, and also requires some extra education in terms of how to use it safely. But I think providing, first off, just different options for period products is an important aspect of this, but then of course cost does come into that. The other aspect is providing high quality and potentially organic products. There's all sorts of issues with kind of a quote unquote regular inserted tampon. There can be health complications, which obviously we don't have time to go into yet, but something that Period Packs is doing alongside the City of Ottawa with the pilot program is we are partnering with a local organic period product startup that's Ottawa-based, women-run, and they will be providing all organic products for the pilot program. So that's something that I can provide more info on in the future if the school board is looking into specific types of products. Did that answer your question fully?
Yeah, no, that's really appreciated, because that's what I was trying to drive at, was that, it's everybody has different choices. And so how do we make sure that those choices are available to individuals? So thank you.
Absolutely. And I'll just tack on one really quick thing is that Period Packs over the next year is really trying to put together educational workshops and ideally get into schools to be providing more information on these different choices, and in particular on sustainable choices like menstrual cups.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank you, Lauren, for coming to delegate with us this evening. It was very informative. And thank you to the trustees for your good questions. And I've been informed that Ariana Vex may be signed in under another account. So if you could speak up, Ariana, so we could get your delegation. And she may be having some technical problems. We'll keep her on the list, but we'll move on to the next delegation, which is Kiara Nambiar. Go ahead.
Hello, hi. So I'm part of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board here, and I was going to say that menstrual products should be placed in all bathrooms at school because many periods come unexpectedly. What may seem like something you should know is coming, it unfortunately isn't. And many girls do not have regular periods that arrive, and once it arrives, they don't know what to do. As much as we seem easy to go up to and ask someone, it is quite uncomfortable, especially being in front of an administrator. And many people do have anxiety when it comes to speaking up, and they feel scared being able to go to anyone, like even if it's just a friend. And periods are extremely expensive. Buying lots of pads each time for $7, especially for lower income families, can be a large strain, especially if it is quite a large family. And though it's an essential product, it has to be something you have to let go at times. And that can lead to people missing class time and doing anything that requires going out without products. And there are times where you need another menstrual product and you can't get one. And wearing the same tampon can lead to things like toxic shock syndrome, a bacterial infection which can get into your bloodstream, and having the pad on for too long can cause overflooding and leaking everywhere. I don't think people would like to clean that up. And having free supplies would alleviate that economic strain for a lot of people. And going back to missing class time, students miss 3 to 4 days of class at times if they don't have any form of products, and that can impact an overall education. And the lack of adequate access to sanitary products impacts every menstruator's life, and it is quite a serious issue. And we don't want to be in a position where we are forced to ask someone for a pad or a tampon. And if schools were to provide free access to menstrual supplies, it would be a step forward in menstrual equity. And thank you very much.
And thank you very much. And are there any questions for Ms. Nambiar? And seeing none, I'd like to thank you very much for your delegation, and thank you very much for coming before us today and speak. Very much appreciated. And I see we do have Ariana Vetsi now signed on. So if you would like to go ahead with your delegation, Ariana, you can start. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you. So I wanted to mention that menstrual products are an essential need of not just women, but non-binary and trans men as well. And I think it's extremely important that we have easy access to sustainable and necessary menstrual products such as pads and tampons, especially in elementary, middle, and high schools, seeing as these are the peak moments in which people go through puberty and start to menstruate. And I think it'd be much, much easier for someone who would possibly get their first period at school or even get one and have forgotten their products at home to just stand up and go to the washroom, grab their desired product and go back to class and forget about it, rather than risk the embarrassment of asking someone for a menstrual product or bleeding through their clothes. And I know from personal experience and a lot of other people that it is quite embarrassing to ask someone or a superior, such as a counselor and a teacher, for menstrual products, and it's not really the best thing to do. I also wanted to bring up a significant event that happened just a couple months ago. And I'm sure you've heard of it, but it was that Scotland became the first country to make menstrual products available in schools and in public for free. And the Scottish government estimated that it would take about £24 million a year to fund accessible menstrual products around the entire country, and that converts to about $32 million. And Scotland's surface area is 77,910 kilometers square. And in 2019, Scotland's female population was 2.78 million women. And the funding for these products would go to these 2.78 million people, excluding non-binary and transgender men. And obviously, OCDSB schools have a much smaller population than that. And I think that if Scotland was wise enough to do it, then so can we.
And thank you very much, Ariana, for your delegation. Are there any questions for Ariana? And seeing none, I'd like to thank you again and thank you very much. And we're going to move on to Emma Bainbridge.
Hi.
Hello,
Can
you
everyone
have 2 minutes, Emma. Yeah, we can hear you good.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Emma Bainbridge, and I'm a grade 12 student at Colonel By Secondary School. So first of all, I'd like to just say thank you to the Board of Trustees for allowing me to speak at this meeting. And like everyone else, I'm here today to voice my support for the ME project, the motion put forth by student trustees Joy and Charles to fund free menstrual hygiene products in all school washrooms. So as people have said before, menstrual hygiene products are essential to students' participation in school. Although they are at the moment available in most schools, they're not very accessible to students because if a student is in need of free menstrual products, they generally have to talk to a teacher or an administrative staff to get them. And many students, especially those in younger grades, really do not feel comfortable talking about their bodily functions, particularly menstruation, to school employees, especially if these employees in question are cisgender men. So I believe that if we made these products available in all school washrooms, it would be much more accessible to students who need them, and they could access them without having to embarrass themselves or put themselves in situations where they're not comfortable. I want to emphasize that in order to make menstrual products as accessible as possible to all students and to honor the OCDSB's commitment to supporting LGBT students, then it's essential that they're available in male, female, and universal washrooms. I've read an equity resource on the OCDSB website called Gender Identity and Expression Guide to Support Our Students, which states that all students have a right to safe restroom facilities and the right to use a washroom that best corresponds to their student's gender and gender expression, regardless of the student's sex assigned at birth. So this document acknowledges that there's a possibility of people who are not assigned male at birth using the male or universal washrooms. Therefore, I think it's important that the board does everything in its power to accommodate these students' needs, such as by providing them products that are essential to their participation in school and giving them the same opportunities and dignity as their cisgender counterparts. And as well as ensuring that menstrual products would be available to all menstruating students, regardless of gender identity, I believe that having menstrual products in male washrooms would actually help demystify periods to cisgender male students and reduce the social stigma surrounding menstruation, as seeing menstrual products on a daily basis would likely desensitize students towards them. I'd like to thank our student trustees for putting forth this motion that I believe is long overdue. I think it's imperative that the OCDSB make menstrual products more accessible to their students by ensuring that they're available in all school washrooms so that they're available to menstruators of all gender identities. Thank you.
Thank you. And is there any questions for Emma? And seeing none, I'd like to thank you for your delegation, Emma. Very, very, very good. Thank you for delegating before us. And moving on to Linda Barry.
Hello. So my name is Linda, as was just said, and I go to Nepean High School. And as well, I am in support of the ME project, and I'm in support of it for a couple of reasons. So as mentioned earlier, of course, not having adequate access to menstrual products has affected the education of many different students. And also, I myself have experienced stigma against it, which has impacted my own menstrual health because I haven't felt comfortable asking questions about my health. And also, I think as well that putting menstrual products in all washrooms would really destigmatize the use of menstrual products. And I think that that's especially necessary for cisgendered boys, especially since it's something very taboo. They think it's kind of a joke. They don't take it seriously, like some of them for sure. And I think that that's really necessary for moving forward and creating just equity in school, where we're able to talk about our problems and be respected for that. Also, I would just like to bring up that some families really don't discuss menstrual health very much. And so I think that having menstrual products in washrooms will, possibly increase a bit more education to that, like in the future, and also just it'll open up some barriers. People will feel more comfortable asking questions in health class. I think that's very important because we don't learn very simple things like how to apply menstrual products, and things like that can lead to toxic shock syndrome or not knowing about different disorders and things like that. So I definitely think having period products would definitely, improve education, because just having that there might make people feel more open asking questions. And of course, it would definitely improve equity, so that people who use menstrual products wouldn't have to, leave school to go home and get them if they don't feel comfortable asking a teacher. They could stay there, they could just pick one up. And I would also just like to say, I had a club at school that actually did an initiative where they put menstrual products in the bathroom. Everyone loved it. Like, this was only the girls' washroom, but everyone really liked it. It was really useful. Everyone was very much in support of the initiative. So I would just like to say that, and so many other school boards have done this as well. So I think that's really important. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Linda? And seeing none, I'd like to thank you for your delegation, Linda. It's very informative. And I'd like to thank all the delegations this evening. It's certainly impressive that you've come out in support of this motion, and we really appreciate hearing from our students and others. It's very much appreciated. And so moving on in our agenda to item number 3, briefing from the chair of the board. I'd like to call upon Chair Scott to provide her briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To begin with, first, a reminder that financial support is available for families during this remote learning period through the Ontario government's Support for Learners program. This program will provide $200 for each child up to grade 12 and $250 for students up to age 21 who have special needs. The application process will be open until the 8th of February. Parents are asked to visit the Ontario government website to learn more and apply. And you can find the website if you simply use as your search term, Support for Learners Ontario. That will get you the top result on the right page. Secondly, on the 21st of January, we'll be holding a speaker series for parents to discuss balancing screen time during the COVID pandemic. This session will feature Dr. Michael Cheng, a child and family psychiatrist at CHEO. Please visit the OCDSB website to learn more. And for our graduating students, the deadlines are fast approaching for applications to colleges and universities. The OUAC deadline is January the 15th, and Ontario colleges is February the 1st. Please, particularly in light of this opportunity to follow the public health guidelines, wear your masks, keep your distance, and limit your amount of travel and congregating in groups. We want our schools to reopen safely. That depends on all of us following the public health guidelines. Thank you. You're muted, Trustee Penny.
Sorry, thank you very much. I don't know about you, but when you were talking about some deadlines, the information unfortunately was garbled, Chair Scott. So could you summarize that?
My internet is a bit unstable at the moment. I'll just turn off my video to make sure it holds. The deadline for applications to colleges and universities, OUAC deadline is the 15th of January. And for Ontario colleges, the deadline is February the 1st.
Thank you very much. Very important information. And so moving on in our agenda to item number 4. Oh, there's any questions for the chair? And seeing none, let's move on to briefing from the director. Madam Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Registration is now open for kindergarten for this fall, fall of 2021. This month, schools across the district will be hosting virtual parent information nights. Parents will learn about our kindergarten program, meet the principal and staff, and we will offer some useful tips to help children prepare for their learning adventure. For dates and information on registration, please visit ocdsb.ca/kindergarten. Also this month, OCDSB secondary schools will be hosting Welcome to High School virtual information sessions. These sessions will explore the pathways available to students and provide an opportunity to learn more about our high schools. Please visit ocdsb.ca/highschools, one word, high school, for the dates and the times and sessions for each school. We will also be hosting Indigenous Speaker Series events for students and staff this month. Autumn Pelletier will be presenting on January 19th for grades 7 to 12. Emily Marie Sequin held a French session earlier today and will be presenting for English students in grades kindergarten to grade 6 on January the 26th. Further details can be found on our website, and I'd like to thank the presenters for sharing their knowledge and experience with students and the staff who joined. With your indulgence, Chair, I might move to the COVID update, which is the next item on the agenda. So moving to the COVID update, we know through the news today, through the media, a state of emergency has been declared in Ontario. Today, in response to the serious increase of COVID-19 cases, the Ontario government has declared a state of emergency. As a part of this, effective Thursday, January 14th, the government is issuing a stay-at-home order requiring everyone to remain at home. The only exceptions are for essential purposes such as going to the grocery store or pharmacy, accessing healthcare services for exercise or essential work. Education and childcare. Under these new orders, remote learning will continue for OCDSB elementary and secondary school students until January the 22nd. The government indicated that they will make a decision about whether to extend the remote learning period by January the 20th, based on medical evidence at that time. The remote learning period was already extended for school boards in some regions of the province, including Windsor-Essex, Peel Region, Toronto, York, and Hamilton. In-person learning for special education students, we are currently providing in-person instruction to some approximately 800 elementary students and 250 secondary school students in specialized program classes whose needs could not be met through a remote learning model. This requires a number of staff to be on site to support these students. The Federations of Teachers Unions has sent a letter to Ottawa Public Health to visit these sites with a view to ensuring public health guidelines are being addressed. The safety of our employees is paramount, and staff will continue to work with OPH to ensure all public health guidelines are being followed. Should OPH make any recommendations, we will share that information and ensure that they are implemented. Based on the announcements today, in-person learning for students with special education needs that cannot be met remotely will continue in an in-person format in some of our schools. New rules when schools do reopen. Once in-person learning resumes for all of our schools, the government has put in place new health and safety requirements for schools, including masking for grades 1 through 3 students and requirement for mask wearing outdoors, enhanced screening protocols, and expanded targeted testing. We will provide more details on these requirements ahead of the return to in-person learning. Child care centers for non-school aged children, will remain open during the state of emergency. Emergency child care services will also continue for eligible families. On the weekend past, the government extended the list of eligible essential workers to include school staff who are currently working in schools to provide support to students with special education needs. This includes all staff providing instructional support, custodial staff, administrative staff, and other staff that ensure school settings are sanitary and safe for staff and students attending in person during the school remote learning period. Eligible individuals can contact an emergency childcare provider from the list on the City of Ottawa website or a third-party operator currently running emergency childcare at an OCDSB site for availability and registration. Remote learning to date, I am pleased to report that the transition to remote learning went very well, very smoothly this past week. I'd like to acknowledge the work of our staff over the winter break and on the return last Monday for their incredible efforts to put plans in place which allowed for a seamless transition. I'd also like to acknowledge the support of parents and students in this process. We know that remote learning creates added pressure on families, and we appreciate the support that we have received through this transition. A number of resources are posted to the district website to support families with remote learning and the impacts of COVID-19. This includes resources to support student learning, the use of technology, access to mental health supports, information about financial assistance programs, and childcare. As we move into the next stage of restrictions, we must recognize that these restrictions are intended to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and to ensure that we can get students back in school in person as soon as possible. I know that our students want that. I know that our families want that. And I know that our staff and our trustees want that as well. Together, we can make that happen by following the guidance of health officials and only leaving our homes for essential purposes. And I reiterate the comments made by Chair Scott. It does mean following the protocols around distancing, mask wearing, washing our hands, and other hygiene expectations to help us to stem the tide. We have, as communities in Ottawa, we've done it before. We can do it again. And we are hoping that on the 20th of January, the announcement that we will receive will indicate that our numbers indicate that we can indeed open our schools to receive students in person as of the 25th and going into that week. And that's all for my reports. Chair Penny, I'm open to any questions.
And thank you very much, Director. And is there any questions for the Director? And seeing no questions, thank you very much for that report. And we're going to move on to matters for action. And the first one is notice of motion, the ME project. Trustee Lara on behalf of students trustees Chen and Liu. And I'd like to call upon Trustee Lara to introduce the motion.
I'd actually like this introduction to be, I will move the motion, but I'd like the introduction to be done by the student trustees.
Very good.
Can you hear me?
We certainly can. Thank you very much. Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will do the introduction. So I would like to thank Trustee Lyra for moving this motion. I would like to thank everyone who made a delegation today. They were very insightful. So we are pleased to introduce the ME project motion. ME stands for menstrual equity, and we would like to thank Ava Burtis, who is a student trustee from GEDSB, who came up with this name and let us adopt it. This is building off of the work of last year's student trustees, Ganabal Gagné and Persith Wijawira, who began the initial planning for this motion and informed us about a pilot program done at one of our schools, Featherston Drive Public School, who piloted a menstrual hygiene product pilot at their school in female washrooms. This motion was developed in consultation with CFO Carson and senior staff, the Advisory Committee on Equity, Student Senate, and a wide variety of students, including transgender and gender diverse students. And I would like to thank everyone who has helped us in developing this motion. This wouldn't be possible without your feedback. So we sent out a letter to all trustees, which I trust that everyone has already read, which received over 1,400 signatures from current and former OCDSB students who all support the OCDSB funding free period products in school washrooms. By funding free period products in school washrooms, we are fostering a learning environment that is more fair and inclusive. Students who menstruate simply cannot choose if or when they menstruate. Menstruation simply isn't a choice. In the letter, students expressed how they've missed class or left school early because they didn't have a pad. They've had to ask friends to leave class to give them a pad and use toilet paper. And a lot of the stories talk about how toilet paper is definitely an ineffective substitute. Trans male students talked about how they were closeted and couldn't ask anyone for a pad, or could only do so while causing anxiety and dysphoria. These experiences were described as humiliating, frustrating, stressful, nerve-wracking, and scary. We as a school board can support these students by providing free period products in our school washrooms. This will support not only students who cannot afford to access period products, but also students who may forget to bring their own. Out of 1,347 student responses on our letter, 80.8% of respondents indicated that there was a time where they needed a menstrual hygiene product but could not access one. Out of 1,379 students, 97.3% of respondents indicated that they would prefer for period products to be placed in washrooms rather than exclusively in school offices or guidance departments. You may notice that in our motion, we have specific wording to include dispensers in male washroom stalls, and specifically in at least one. This is in order to make our motion more inclusive for transgender and gender diverse students to support them. There is simply no other option that provides gender diverse students who use the male washroom with unsupervised and private access. I would like to thank you once again, and I would like to stress the impact that this will make on tens of thousands of current OCDSB students and many future students in many future years. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Student Trustee Chen, for that introduction. Is there any debate and or questions for the staff or the Trustee Campbell?
Whoops, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I guess I have a couple questions for the speaker, but then a couple questions for staff. With respect to the speaker, first I have to say to the student trustees and to Trustee Lyra, who helped do the honors here. Big kudos. Obviously a lot of thought has gone into the various clauses of this motion, and I quite respect that. Nevertheless, I have a couple questions. One is, we have heard, I believe from at least one of the delegations, maybe a couple of them, the importance, and I believe from a colleague, the possible importance of ensuring an appropriate variety of products. Though that ensuring an appropriate variety is not explicitly referred to in the motion. And I guess what I'm wondering is, so there's a question through you, Mr. Chair, I think to the mover, or the ultimate mover, is whether this motion might not benefit by adding language requiring some sort of a variety minimum. That's my first question.
Thank you very much. And I believe that question is directed towards the mover. So Trustee Lara, was that envisioned?
So I believe that this motion would benefit from explicitly stating that there should be a variety, but I would like to hear what the student trustees believe.
Can I speak now then?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. The reason why we didn't include that language initially was just because that wasn't a piece we'd consulted CFO Carson on, and because we didn't want to like tie the hands of staff if for whatever reason there were material constraints that meant that like the OCDSB couldn't like afford to acquire a variety of products. That said, I would hope that if we can get a staff comment from maybe CFO Carson here or somebody to on whether or not they think it would be appropriate for us to integrate that explicit provision, then I think I would most definitely support that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I perhaps get a staff comment then along those lines?
Certainly can, if staff would care to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will ask CFO Carson to comment on that.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We did have a discussion around a number of items in this motion. And I want to thank Joy and Charles for agreeing to take out some of the specificity. Although staff had begun work on this a couple of years ago, some of the work did get overtaken by the pandemic. And there are some real implementation issues to work our way through. We know that there will be the need for something other than just a single product solution. But I think I worry about getting any more specific in the motion itself. I can tell you that it is our intent, assuming that this motion passes at board, to develop a group that can move forward with a practical implementation plan and get the right answers to some of the questions that you asked of delegations and that we've asked during the last 3 or 4 months as we've developed it. But our staff preference would be not to get more specific in the motion. We certainly understand the concern, and it's one that we share.
Thank you. I'll listen to the debate then on that one going forward, and I'll pause what I might have been about to do there. I have a question with respect to the education clause. And I guess what I'm wondering is, it may be assumed, but maybe it needs to be made more explicit. And Mr. Chair, I believe this might be to the mover or movers. It doesn't mention grade level requirements. Is it assumed, since this would be provided to students in grades 4 to 12, that appropriate education on usage and disposal would be provided to all students in age appropriate or grade appropriate in grades 4 to 12, or should that be specified?
Thank you very much. So I believe that question is again with regards to the intent of the motion. So Trustee Lara, did you wish the student trustees to answer that, or did you want to answer that?
I believe the student trustees are in a better place to answer that intent of this. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
So thank you. That's a great question. So we originally had grades 4 to 12 in the education clause, but we decided to remove it because I think it's important to really decide what is the best age to start doing this, because that might be earlier than grade 4. And we also might need to explain to younger students like what these products are. And so that were just those were just some considerations in here, as well as really making sure that I want to stress the rationale for the placement. This is to explain why we're doing it, why we're placing them in male washrooms, if you were wondering. Does that answer your question?
Perhaps just as a follow-up, you say perhaps earlier the grades 4 to 12. So would a clause along the lines of at least grades 4 to 12 be in line with your intent?
I think it's probably best to leave it more open. Obviously, it's important for something that we've always talked about with CFO Carson and senior staff is that how it's important for motions to be a little bit more vague than we would like to in order to provide the flexibility. And it's important for senior staff to make the best decision on who we should be providing education to. I'm not sure if it's allowed, but if Joy has anything to add.
I guess I'm a little bit confused because the motion is specific in terms of making sure that the provision of these products and disposal and this kind of thing is provided to students in grade 4. So we would potentially be in a position where we'd be providing products to students without explaining their use or why they're there. And that confuses me.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying here. So, we decided grade 4 because we feel that that is like more that's like earlier than that'll cover like the vast majority of students. As students typically begin menstruating after grade 4, but with respect to the younger students, obviously, we have schools that go up to grade 6, and so if they include bathrooms in grades 4 to 6. Then that means younger students who may be menstruating earlier, such as in grade 3, they would be able to have access to these products as well because they're connected. It's just we're not sure when is the best time to provide education on this. And I would also like to point to clause C, where the OCDSB can also provide free menstrual hygiene products to students at other appropriate distribution channels where necessary at the discretion of school admin. But the motion explicitly states that we'll only be providing products from grades 4 and up.
Thank you. I guess what I'll propose is a small amendment with respect to clause D, that the language be amended to include the words grade appropriate after the word provide. And let's see, and so the language, actually, I'll just read it out rather than talking about various inserts. Provide grade appropriate education to all grade targeted students. That's my proposed amendment.
Okay, and thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. So you're, I'm just hoping that that Manager Guthrie was quick enough to record that so that we can get it a little bit in writing, that I believe between provide and education, there is grade, the words grade appropriate. And what was the second one again? Okay, all grade targeted students.
Provide a grade appropriate education to all grade targeted students.
Okay. And does that also serve as your introduction, Trustee Campbell, or did you have
it can, sure. Well, very briefly, Mr. Chair, I believe that we're specifically, and there is such a thing, and the speaker spoke to it, as early onset menstruation. I did, from my own part, not personally affected, but some research on this, and it's not that uncommon. So if we are targeting grades 4 and up, for probably very good reason, it strikes me that we need to at least explain what these things are in all their washrooms and why they're there, and potentially how to use them if you're even an outlier child in grade 4 who needs access to them. I don't know why we wouldn't educate. So if the intent is that an outlier child in grade 4 might need it, then we need to provide that education. This seems to me that they very much go together. That's the intent behind the amendment.
All right, thank you very much. And I do have Trustee Lara, Jean Trant, and Trustee Bell on the list on the original motion, but because we now have an amendment, I'd like everyone to put their hands down and only put your hand up if you want to speak on the amendment. So I have Trustee Liu.
I really appreciate the spirit of this amendment. The only thing I'm concerned about is at this point, it looks like this clause would imply that education would only be provided to students in grades 4 and 12 and not, for example, to grade 1 students who see like these little packages and are like, oh, like what's that? Part of the reason why we left it so open was just so, even for the smallest things, such as like, for example, maybe having to tell like grade 1 students, like, hey, like this is what pads are. You probably don't need them at this age, so don't like touch them and like use them. Yeah, I would just appreciate some clarification from Trustee Campbell about the grade targeted part, because it seems to me that it's sort of limiting the educational bit to grades 4 and 12, which is
permitted, Mr. Chair?
Yes, respond, Trustee Campbell, to the intent.
Thank you. In fact, I probably should have, to address that concern, I missed that. Thank you. I probably should have said at a minimum provided to.
So,
which was the intent.
Okay. Nevertheless, you have moved both those changes. So we're going to debate this amendment, and then if you have a further amendment, we can debate that further. So Trustee Scott, go ahead. Or Trustee Lua, you still have some time if you want to continue.
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you very much. So Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if we could have a comment from staff in terms of when the topic of menstruation is actually included in the physical and health education curriculum.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I'll respond to the question. And so it does begin in grade 5 in the health and physical education curriculum, with some aspects of reference to basic hygiene in earlier grades. But I would also call to the attention of trustees and the discussion here that we also have to contemplate a culturally responsive approach, because we do recognize that we do have communities where the conversation about menstruation, reproduction, and the knowledge and information that goes along with that is not neutral, and does have, there are some impactful pieces there. So we have to ensure that we're balancing between the areas in the curriculum that does in fact address this conversation with the the sensitivity to our communities around how and when that conversation takes place. And so it is wise to have some level of flexibility of language around the interpretation, because of course there is an education piece that is required.
Thank you very much for that response. I do have a concern that we are only including this formally in the curriculum at grade 5. I think it should be in the curriculum earlier than that. I also have some concern about saying about the words grade targeted. So I would ask that we vote on the two pieces separately. And I would also like to sub-amend with regard to the grade appropriate education. I think it should be age and grade appropriate education. So I would like to amend to add age and grade.
Okay, and Trustee Scott, is that your introduction to this sub-amendment?
That is my entire introduction, which would be to add age and grade appropriate before the words education, and hoping that that is a friendly amendment, sub-amendment.
And so I'd like to know if that sub-amendment is friendly. If it is not friendly, then please put your hand up. And it does indeed look like that's a friendly amendment.
Thank you, and that's everything for me.
Thank you very much. So the clause as amended, if we can get that up on our screen, Manager Guthrie, with the amendment and the sub-amendment, just so that everyone can be clear on what the wording is. And I believe there was it's all, yes, sub-amended by all grade and age. Yeah.
And I did ask to have separate votes on that particular amendment and the addition of all grade targeted.
Okay. So since your amendment was friendly, Trustee Scott, we're going to go back to the original amendment, and I think we have Trustee Lara on our list. Go ahead, Trustee Lara.
I would also like to propose a sub-amendment. I'd like to, I also wasn't a fan of the grade targeted language. I'd like to switch it to provide age and grade appropriate education to at least grade 4 to 12 students on the proper usage ... To at least grades 4 to 12 students. I think it would be grades. And I would also hope that this is friendly.
Thank you very much. And that is the amendment now on the floor. And if this amendment is not friendly, please raise your hand. And it looks like that amendment is friendly. And is there any, just waiting for the record to catch up here.
That was everything I had on the sub-amendment.
Okay, thank you very much. And it looks like, so Trustee Scott, your separate vote on the second part where it said grade targeted is now been eliminated. So are you good with having a vote on the whole thing?
Yes, that's okay. I'm agreeable to voting on the whole thing.
Okay, thank you very much. And so now, seeing no further debate on another sub-amendment or the amendment, we're going to go back to the original motion, and we still had Trustee Lyra on the list for the, but she is the mover. So if it's okay, Trustee Lyra, we can wait until the wrap up for you to make a comment, and we're going to move on to Trustee.
Mr. Chair, I actually, I had the floor. I'll cede it. My remaining seconds were actually used by you and some others. Could you put me back on the list, please?
I certainly can. Trustee Bell.
Mr. Chair, we haven't voted on the amendment as sub-amended.
Oh, you are correct. So let's go back, and the amendment as sub-amended is in front of you, and I'd like to call the question on that sub-amendment. All those in favor? And opposed? And abstentions? And thank you very much, and passes, and thank you very much, Trustee Scott, for reminding me of that. And so,
Mr. Chair, I would like to speak before we get to wrap up. I've got some staff questions.
Oh, okay, that's no problem. You were actually on the list before Trustee Bell, so go ahead, Trustee Lyra.
So back to Clause D, when I first became a trustee, there was a lot of discussion around this table about what we could or could not ask staff to teach with regards to the sex ed curriculum. And I'm concerned about what happens if an individual teacher puts their hand up and says, I am not going to teach this, it's against my beliefs, and it's not in the curriculum. So at that grade 4 level, what is going to happen? What does enforcement look like? Are we able to enforce Clause D on the education part? Could I get a staff comment about this?
Madam Director?
Yes, and thank you, and through you, Chair. Unfortunately, Superintendent Tuaj was called away and so is unable to be here, but I will take my best go at it. One of the things, and as I referred to earlier, I spoke to the notion of cultural responsiveness. Cultural responsiveness includes not only our students, but also our staff and our environment. And so there is a cognizance there. In terms of what happens if a teacher or an educator is indicating that they will not go outside of the parameters of the curriculum, there is some reasonable basis for that. That said, one of the things we have to recognize is that because it is a sensitive matter, that some students may not want to engage in the conversation with a particular educator, may find a safer space. So I think that there is an opportunity to have some flexibility about how that learning takes place and where that learning takes place. And in fact, that it is, we can consider looking at a variety of different ways for that education to occur. We do recognize, and I believe one of the trustees indicated that early menstruation amongst menstruators is an anomaly as opposed to a common occurrence. And so when we think about, for example, how it is that we engage our public health nurses as partners, we have seen a greater partnership there with our public health nurses. We also know that we engage with other partners around understanding a variety of different aspects of growing up, of physical health, and of well-being. And so to categorize and talk about compliance in terms of delivering knowledge on this particular issue, I think we have to be cautious. There is some guidance from the curriculum, but I think there is also guidance around our commitment to wholesome well-being of all students and dignity of students and engagement and partnership with families. So I would refrain from using the language of compliance and enforcement, but rather engagement and collaboration. And I think about our partners as also the opportunity for education on this particular area.
Okay, so just to confirm, we will be able to actionalize Part D in all of our grades. You're muted.
Sorry. At least once an evening. I would have to see Part D again because I have 3 devices going and I can't see that anywhere at the moment. Oh, I think I have found it. So you're asking about that the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board provide education to students on the proper usage and disposal of menstrual hygiene products, as well as the rationale for their placement. And I know this has been amended, but I can't see the amendment. And that's what you're asking me about.
Particularly the as well as the rationale for their placement part.
Right. I think that we have to make the distinction as well, Trustee Lara, between teaching and communication. And so communicating this information, what I would see in terms of the rationale for their placement, that when we're talking about younger grade students, students 4 and down, that we would be communicating that as something that is communicated to families as a part of an ongoing conversation between families and school, giving families an opportunity to engage in that conversation with their very young children, as opposed to undertaking it unilaterally as education about.
All right, thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Trustee Lara. And now we're moving on to Trustee Bell.
Point of information or clarification, Mr. Chair?
Is there a note of clarification that you wish to provide, Student Trustee Chen?
Yes. So I would just want to clarify that the amendment has passed and now we're debating the main motion, right?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure.
No problem. Trustee Bell.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, one of the issues that I don't think we've been able to touch on as of yet this evening is the environmental impact of menstrual products. And there is a lot of research out there that shows single-use plastics leave a huge carbon footprint. And so I am wondering if if I can propose an amendment that would signal that in looking at the diversity of products that we will make available, that we could ensure that they are environmentally friendly options. Now, I wouldn't want to put too many parameters on that. I would like to leave it open, but just to ensure that when looking at the range of possibilities, that we would take into account the environmental impact of our purchases.
So Trustee Bell, do you have a specific wording or adding another part or?
Yeah, so I have an amendment to B where it says that the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board ensures the continual supply of free, environmentally friendly menstrual hygiene products, adding those 2 words.
Okay, thank you very much. And that is serves as your introduction to that?
It does.
Okay, thank you very much. And is this a friendly amendment?
Sorry, can I see the
it's not
text,
friendly-
Mr. Chair?
So can we pop up the text that shows environmentally friendly between the words free and menstrual hygiene products in Part B, please? So if Trustee Lyra and Trustee Liu and Trustee Campbell, so it's obviously not friendly. Okay. So that is Trustee Bell's introduction. So we're going to start a list on to debate the amendment. And Trustee Lyra.
I love the addition of environmentally friendly, but I really hate weasel words. And environmentally friendly is not something that I can put a pin in and say, this is an environmentally friendly menstrual product and this is not. And I'm wondering how we're going to actionalize putting environmentally friendly into this motion. Can we get a staff comment on how you would make a determination that one type of menstrual product is environmentally friendly versus another one? Is it going to be by brand? Is it going to be by material? Is it going to be by company? Like, it's going to be by distance it had to travel to get to Ottawa. How are we going to be making that sort of distinction?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I dare say that the trustee has asked a question that has not been deeply contemplated from the point of view that there are so many considerations for adjudication, and it does certainly put a limitation on what is done and how quickly it can be done, as well as how it can be resourced. I will turn to CFO Carson for further information on that, as I know that there has been some conversation about this. So CFO Carson, please.
Mr. Chair, I'd begin by saying whenever we're looking at products, we always consider the environmental impact of that product. And both trustees have mentioned that some of the issues. Trustee Lyra talked about where do you start in terms of the overall supply chain and how does that impact. We did not, in the discussions that the students trustees and I had, we didn't specifically put in that that's what we would have. I think we were comfortable that that is one of the factors we would be considering. I wish we could always guarantee those would be the only products that would be in use, but we are also moving into this with not a huge database of our future costs, future availability. And so that would be a factor that we would be considering. From our point of view, the piece that we have the most control over is the disposition of the product, how it enters into the waste stream. the local point of manufacture, if there is such a, if that is a possibility. But those are the kinds of decisions that would be looked at when the product evaluation group is looking at what should be offered.
All right, thank you for your answer. Having heard that and weighed the pros and cons, I'm going to be supporting this motion or this amendment.
Thank you very much, Trustee Lyra. And moving on for the amendment only, Trustee Liu, Student Trustee Liu.
I want to ask CFO Carson a follow-up question, because like just explicitly whether you prefer that such specific language be in the motion or not. The only reason why I'm concerned is that, like, if, for example, environmentally friendly simply means like menstrual cups and say reusable pads, that really ties like the hands of CFO Carson's team and such, and it also limits like the type of products that students may or may not want to use. So I just do want to ask CFO Carson again, through you, Chair, would you prefer that this amendment be made or not to the motion?
Mr. Chair, I think the concern we have is trying to make sure that this is something we can sustain in the long term. We certainly, the Product Evaluation Committee is going to be looking at a lot of different factors. Environmental is one of them. Cost will be another, the product, the availability, the kinds of things we do when we look at any kind of product. By identifying environmentally friendly, we're privileging one above the others. Having said that, we as a district are committed to environmental sustainability, and we do try our best to maintain that. I think that the only thing I can say is that with the wording that's in the motion there, we may find ourselves in contravention technically of some of that motion when we go down the road with some of the products, but it is something that we will be looking at as one of the key factors. So we understand this motion. We are that one of the purposes of the motion is to make a clear statement to our community that the OCDSB has this commitment to kids and to families, and that there are pieces that you want to have clear. I'm just trying to think of ways to make sure that the implementation doesn't get hung up by some of the technicalities in the motion. Having said that, if there's 3 products and one of them is an 8 out of 10, except it's not as environmentally friendly and the only environmentally friendly one is a 3 out of 10, we're going to go with the 8 out of 10. And I think that, the community and trustees would expect us to do nothing else. So we understand the intent of the motion, but that's the way we would probably try to implement it. And, things are changing. There's been a lot of change even since we first looked at this a couple of years ago. So I don't need to be as sort of pessimistic as I am, but I just think that that's just a warning I would say, is that we may not always be able to meet every clause of this motion completely, but we would follow it as that guideline for the work we're doing.
Okay, great, thank you. I just did want to clarify on like the staff comment and like the staff ability to select products based on the amendment. That's all, thank you.
Thank you, Student Trustee Liu. Moving on to Trustee Schwartz on the amendment.
Yeah, I just, pardon me. I simply wanted to follow on what Student Trustee Liu was referencing in terms of limiting or potentially limiting the types of products that can be made available. And I think if we're going to be, and I mean, you all know I work for an environmental organization. I'm of course supportive of environmental initiatives, but I'm also supportive of this motion insofar as ensuring the availability of products for students. And if we need to start in a way that provides a range of products with the intent of looking toward environmental sustainability longer term, I would be more in favor of keeping that particular amendment out of the motion in order for this to get underway, rather than hampering or potentially hampering the efforts of staff to get this in place, because we've complicated matters. So I won't be voting in favor of this particular amendment, even though I do hope that staff will certainly be looking at this as one of the criterion.
Thank you very much, Trustee Schwartz. And Trustee Campbell on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did I make the text disappear, or did it disappear on me?
It was taken off the screen, yes. So we'll ask for if it can be put back showing the amendment. Thank you very much.
I'm never sure. Thank you. So I guess, Mr. Chair, I guess what I propose, having listened to the conversation, and I broadly agree, I'm hearing everybody, broadly agree. I understand the motivation, and I'm sympathetic to it. There are other factors involved, and I think we heard the CFO on that as well. So I guess if our intent is to consider a number of factors, including environmental friendliness or environmental impact, then why not state it? And then it's clear to the public and to everybody else. So I guess, Mr. Chair, I'm considering the benefits, I guess, of replacing the words environmentally friendly with comma, considering environmental impact, variety of preferences, and other factors, uncomma, as substitute text, but I don't know if that would be considered a sub-amendment, or be better to just introduce as a brand new amendment.
Trustee Campbell, it would be if you're going to do that, then what we'd have to do is first consider this amendment, and then afterwards, depending upon the result, you could introduce your amendment.
Great, thank you.
Okay. And so let me see the participants list here. We have no further speakers on the amendment. So Trustee Bell, did you want wrap up on your amendment?
Yes, please. Thank you. Through you, Chair. I really appreciated CFO Carson's characterization of what this would do by adding in environmentally friendly. It puts a stake in what our priorities are. And so when we're weighing what these various factors, those words signal that that is going to take a great priority. It's definitely not saying you have to only use reusable pads or Diva cups or whatever. What it is saying is that we understand as a board that these products do in fact have a great carbon footprint, and we will be conscious and place a priority on ensuring that we do not choose the most destructive for our environment in order to meet the costs. And so if the motion by Trustee Campbell would be more amenable to saying upfront and placing this priority, then I would be willing to change the motion to his wording.
Okay, so in order that we have some transparency and accountability in our motions, we do have to vote on this motion, and then fortunately Trustee Campbell has the floor immediately after, and if he wishes to introduce it, he certainly can. All right, so that's your wrap up, and I'd like to have call a question on this this amendment, the words environmentally friendly. All those in favor? And opposed? Sorry. And the motion is defeated. And so Trustee Campbell, you have the floor. Or
Thank you,
Trustee
Mr.
Bell, actually you have, sorry, Trustee Bell, you have more, you do have some additional time. I'm sorry to take it away from you.
No problem. I will pass over my time to Trustee Campbell.
Thank you very much. Trustee Campbell, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So very briefly, just to pick that up there, I guess what I propose is after the word free, and I'm open to edits, but what came to me, after the word free in clause B, we insert the words comma, considering environmental impact, comma, variety of preferences, comma, and other factors, uncomma.
Does that capture your amendment, Trustee Campbell?
It would be continuous by of environmental impact, comma, variety of preferences, comma, and other factors. One more comma. Well, at least that's the English language style I prefer. Some people would argue about the comma. Anyway, so that's it, Mr. Chair. In terms of a very brief introduction, in fact, what I'm hearing from staff and what I'm hearing from all my colleagues and others is this is precisely what we mean. But nowhere in the motion is this stated. So I think for the sake of the public and general guidance, and it provides a loose framework for what to consider, and it's non-exclusive, that we should just state clearly what it is we mean and what we're expecting. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And by the appearance of hands, I take it that the motion is not friendly. And so that will serve as your introduction to the motion. And so on our list is Trustee Lyra. Go ahead.
So I believe that the intent of the previous sub-amendment that failed was to prioritize environmental impact over other factors. And the way this is worded puts environmental factors and other factors on an equal level. I think we would be better served to say prioritizing environmental impact and recognizing a variety of preferences and other factors. And so I'm going to move that as a sub-amendment. So it's going to say prioritizing environmental impact and recognizing a variety of preferences and other factors. And I too am fond of the Oxford comma. So yes. And I saw, oh, I see a litany of hands. Okay.
And so that's that is your amendment, Trustee Lyra?
The text reflects the amendment I wish to move, yes.
Okay, or your sub-amendment rather. And so
Yes.
by the show of hands, I take it that it's not friendly. So I'd like to go to, and if Trustee Scott, did you wish to speak to the sub-amendment? To the amended
Sorry, I'm just trying to get myself unmuted here. Yeah, I don't support this, but I did have a different change if this is not if this does not become part of the motion.
Okay, thank you very much. And next on the change is Student Trustee Chen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would like to comment on this sub-amendment about prioritizing environmental impact. So I completely understand the need for environmental sustainability, especially as a leader in public education, about how we should be protecting the environment. However, when we put this specific wording, prioritizing environmental impact, this puts this above everything else. And so I would like to ask trustees, would we like to prioritize environmental impact, or would we like to ensure that students have reliable access to these products? Because in the end, if we're unable to fulfill all of our dispensers, and because we are left to prioritize environmental impact, then it is the students who in the end be unable to access these products. And so I would like to caution about what the priorities are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Chen. And Trustee Liu?
I do concur with Trustee Chen. I don't agree with this sub-amendment because I frankly don't think that environmental impact should be the factor we prioritize above all else. I think factors such as like availability, long-term provision, those are factors in my eyes that are more important. So just on that principled basis, I don't agree that the environmental impact should be the top priority, and thus I don't believe that should be in the language of the motion.
Thank you very much. Trustee Campbell? Trustee Campbell, did you have a comment?
Sorry, having mouse troubles. Thank you. Very briefly, it's very difficult for me. I mean, I'm listening carefully to conversation. I don't use these products, and I have no idea whether there are really big differences in terms of quality and others, and some of the speakers have talked to that. And I guess I'm really loath to run the risk perhaps of insisting on something really substandard doesn't meet student needs. So listen to the conversation, but I'm concerned about the proposed prioritization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Trustee Boothby.
Thank you. I'm not going to support this motion or anyone or any kind of motions that are starting to get much more in the weeds here. Our strategic plan, we have responsible stewardship. And to me, this is all part of the strategic plan. And I am sure that our very professional procurement staff looks at that strategic plan. And I know that we have significant procedures in place where we look at these kinds of things when we are doing our procurements. So I think that we're being a little too prescriptive for staff. And in my opinion, I think that we've given staff pretty good direction with where we are so far in the motion, less these amendments, and we should let staff do it and get this program underway. And if we need to look at it and evaluate it in a year or two and find that maybe we're not very happy with some of the choices, or that maybe there are new products, etc., on the market at the time, that we can look at it. But we have already very clearly directed staff under our strategic plan in everything we do to be looking at environmental stewardship. So I think that we're just getting a little too prescriptive, and we need to give staff the leeway to do their job and to get this done, and with the faith that they're going to follow our strategic plan, which we've already given them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Trustee Scott, what I'm going to assume is that we're gonna vote on this, and if it fails, then you'll be next on our speaker list on Trustee Campbell's amendment, which we'll go back to if this fails, and if it doesn't, then you're next on the speaker list anyway. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So I'd like to call a question on
Do
this.
I not get wrap up?
Oh, sorry, Trustee Lara. Yes, wrap up. Go ahead.
So the intention of this amendment was to sort of put our finger on the scale when it came to environmental concerns. CFO Carson told us that they would prioritize an 8 over a 3, and this amendment was sort of to give them direction to say, if it's a 6 and an 8, maybe we go with the 6 if it's an environmentally friendly 6 over an otherwise 8, instead of to say we have to weigh all things equally. And that was the intention of this. It's all right if it doesn't pass, but that was the sort of goal that I was intending, not to undercut the supply, not to cause it to not happen, but to sort of put our thumb on the scale.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the correction, Trustee Lara. You're quite right. So let's call a question on this amendment, and I just want to remind you that if this fails, we go back to Trustee Campbell's amendment. So all those in favor of Trustee Lara's amendment, a sub-amendment. And opposed. And that motion fails.
Trustee Penny, I just wanted to make sure, because I clicked some wrong things, that I did not intend to vote in favor of Trustee Lara's amendment. I did wish to vote opposed.
Okay, thank you very much. So the motion does fail. The sub amendment does fail. So let's go back to Trustee Campbell's. And I have sort of lost the picture a little bit on Trustee Campbell's amendment. Are there any speakers to it? Trustee Scott, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I only have one problem with Trustee Campbell's amendment, and that is its placement within this clause after the word free, because it creates an incredibly garbled sentence. So what I would like to do is to pick up the amendment in total, put a comma after school board, inserted between the word board and the word ensure. And then we don't need the comma after the word free anymore.
Thank you very much. And is this sub-amendment friendly? If it's not friendly, please raise your hand. All right, the amendment is friendly. So I noted
and that's
that.
It for me.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. And we are back to the amendment by Trustee Campbell, which is on the screen. Are there any speakers to this amendment? And seeing none, Trustee Campbell, did you want wrap up on your amendment?
Very briefly, Mr. Chair, and in possible reply to some who expressed concern that we're getting too much into the weeds here. I have sympathy for that view. However, the question of whether environmental considerations will be included and whether a variety of preferences will be included, whether it has been a subject of debate and concern here tonight. It will be, I imagine, as well amongst students and others. And so the proposed addition of the words here, while perhaps superfluous in terms of if we reference the strategic plan, it wouldn't do to say, you know, as per the strategic plan, or necessarily to assume that. I think that it forms an important messaging role to basically indicate to people that we have considered these things, they are important to us, and people can be assured that they will be considered. And that's the only purpose of including the words.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. I'd like to call a question on Trustee Campbell's amendment. All those in favor? And opposed? And abstaining? And thank you very much. That amendment passes, and we're back to the main motion. And I did note that Trustee Jenkins.
Mr. Chair, I still have the floor and only a few seconds expended.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. And I do have a question for staff, and that goes to cost, which we haven't really touched on here. My understanding is that staff might have a ballpark estimate what the cost of implementing this might be if the school board were to shoulder the entire cost itself without any the advantage of any partnership. So I guess I am interested in the initial capital cost. These are due diligence questions, I think, if we're approving a motion such as this. And what ongoing maintenance of the capital, product supply cost, and custodial costs might be. I was led to believe that there might be some ballpark idea from staff this evening about what we're looking at here should this go forward.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. CFO Carson and his team have indeed investigated. CFO Carson, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. There's a wide range of estimates when we've spoken to other boards, because some of them have used very different models from what are being produced here. In consultation with a board of our similar size who is looking at implementing next year, they, like us, they were delayed by the pandemic. They are estimating a first-year cost of about $250,000. About half of that is the initial capital installation. The other half is product. What we are not sure of is what our success will be in looking for donations or a fundraising partner. One of the trustees mentioned earlier this evening, the Toronto motion was conditional upon it not costing the board. And so that has put some steps in the way. When we spoke to one of the other boards, they provided a much lower cost to us. And really, we didn't get a lot of feedback into is how much of that is the result of donated product and how much of it is limitations on how they chose to distribute. One of the things that is in this motion, which we are supporting, is that in fact we will be providing access in the male washrooms, and that is not something the other boards had been looking at. So we don't have a firm number. I think for at the current time, probably looking at ongoing costs annually of something in the order of $100,000 to $150,000. I think it will, you know, there are different ways we can look at this, but I think if this were to be approved by the board, we will be engaging with the foundation to work on our behalf with some of the national, provincial, and local groups that are involved in fundraising and support for this product.
Thank you. Just a supplementary, and I think that'll do me. And does the CFO's estimate include incremental custodial costs for stocking and disposal and cleaning and what have you?
Mr. Chair, one of the reasons we asked for a longer time to implement this was that we would be looking at what's the most effective way to do it. It's probably evening staff. It'll be, we don't think there's a huge increase in costs if once you get the routine down, but it will have some impact. There's no doubt about it, but we haven't been able to firmly estimate it. Our intent is to do a pilot at a couple of schools to help us get a better handle on those numbers so we can incorporate them into future budgets.
And thank you. Though I do have one final question through you, Mr. Chair, and that is, and not that I'm proposing doing otherwise necessarily. I had been considering a further clause, but it goes to my question, which is by passing this motion tonight and at board, should we do so, would that put us in a poor bargaining position with respect to cost sharing with any prospective partners if we had not explored partnership opportunities first?
Mr. Chair, I don't think so. As we identify prospective donors, and we want to make sure that we're not tripping over some of the other organizations that are always looking for donors as well, that'll be part of the issue. And some of the larger national and international suppliers already have what they're calling donation programs as part of their marketing initiatives. So we'll want to think about how that works. So no, I don't believe this hinders us in any way.
Great, thank you, and that does me.
Oh, thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. And Trustee Jenkins, did you want to speak?
Thanks. Thank you, Chair Scott. Or Chair Penny, sorry. Actually, I had two questions, and the first one was regarding costing, which CFO Carson did give clarification. But my second question actually is really the timelines. In Part C, it refers to September 2022 as the start date. That's a year and a half from now. It seems, are we firm on that timeline? What are the preliminary findings that have given us that date?
Mr. Chair, the motion says that we will have it all in place by September 2022. We will be, we've already been doing some of this work, and you will see some of it being tested and rolled out likely in a couple of schools by the end of June, if not for this September. There is work to be done by an evaluation committee. There are some logistical issues. In speaking to one of the boards, they've had to go to dispensers that have a time delay so that there's only one product every 30 seconds so that things aren't being wasted. So there are things to be investigated. It's our intention to begin rolling it out no later than the beginning of 2021, September 2021. But we wanted to make sure we have time. There's over 100 buildings, an awful lot of washrooms, an awful lot of installation that's required. And so we just wanted to make sure that we had time and that is a target date for completion. But it doesn't mean that we're waiting until August 2022 to start the project. But it will take time, and not just of, our staff in some ways have the easier parts. It's the all of the implementation of the kinds of teaching and cultural work that we need to do with people as well has to happen. So we want to do it, we want to do it right. And that's why I asked the student trustees in their motion to give us that additional time.
Thank you. That's it for questions for me then. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Jenkins. And Trustee Huff.
Hi, just thank you, Chair. Just a quick comment about the issue of sponsorship partnerships. I'm a development officer professionally. That's what I do for a living. And I think that the point that could be made from this is that by us moving ahead as a board with a definitive action, we're actually increasing both the urgency and the import of the issue. So it would actually increase to a sponsor the relevance of the project. So I think that we don't have to worry about that. And I think that we'll probably be able to find a sponsor that would step up for such an important and groundbreaking initiative in this area.
Thank you very much, Trustee Huff. And seeing no further speakers to the issue, we're going to go back to Trustee Lyra. And I'm assuming that you're going to want the student trustees to speak on the for the wrap up.
I would. Thank you.
Okay, then thank you. I'll take closing, just 1 second. So as everyone here has noted, like this motion is fundamentally about participation and the fact that students can't participate in school unless they have access to period products. And so based on the stories that we've heard from the delegation, stories that you have read in the letter we sent, our hope is that with this motion, no student should ever have to miss class again or be late for class trying to find a pad or have to use toilet paper. And furthermore, on a cultural level, I think in passing this motion, we as a school board can do our part as an actor within a far bigger history and world to lift the stigma surrounding periods, create accessible and inclusive public spaces, and also break down cisnormativity. So I think this pandemic has been really disruptive to a lot of the work that we've been trying to do as a board to create equity and to continue improving our school board. But I think this motion is one of those major steps we can take to directly impact the lives of at least 30,000 students in 143 schools. And a lot of the work we currently do is complicated and long, and that's not to say this one won't be, but something as simple as providing a pad like this one has a really immediate impact on the lives of students. So thank you very much for the time allotted to having us debate this motion, and thank you so much to all the staff and students who have been involved in this process.
Thank you very much. And I see that Trustee Huff still has her hand up. Did you have another comment, Trustee Huff? Thank you very much. And so there being no further speakers and wrap up being happened, and going to call the question on this motion. All those in favor of the motion as amended? And opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And moving on to the next item in our agenda. Actually, what we maybe should do, seeing as it's 8:53, let's take a very short break and come back at 9 o'clock. All right? Okay, let's get back to it, everyone. Thank you very much for coming back in a timely manner. I was informed a little bit earlier that one of our people that's at the table had a little bit of a technical issue and could not respond to the director's report regarding the COVID update and other, and so, and it's Jean Trott, and so I'm going to let her just have her response, and if the director wants to respond to that, she can also do so. But then after that, immediately after that, we'll move on to item 7.2. So Jean, did you want to say something?
Yes, please. And thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me. I'm sorry I didn't get my hand up fast enough, but it was a rather quick turnaround from you asking for questions and saying no, seeing none and leaving. Anyway, my concern is the continuation of spec ed students for the next 2 weeks. I have been hearing repeatedly from my members, more than once, more very angry members who are at work at this time. And my members are the ones who are doing the up close and personal toileting, feeding, personal care for these students who are not wearing any PPE. And I do know that the district has said that OPH has made it clear that everything that can be done is being done, and my members are safe. However, that does not. It's more of a comment because I know it's out of your hands as to whether spec ed kids come or not. However, I just need it to be made known that the morale of my members is exceedingly low at this time. They're feeling that they're not being heard. They're feeling that
And Jean, I think your internet is frozen up, unfortunately. Yeah, I think Jean's internet froze up, but yeah, I think that you may have got the feeling of that message, Director. And did you wish to respond?
Thank you, Chair. Indeed, it is a complex situation with a lot of considerations that we need to make and decisions that are difficult. Superintendent Simmons is here and is prepared to respond to that piece. But before he does, I just need to really reinforce the fact that we indeed are listening and we are working with all of our partners in the interest of our students and in consideration of the safety of all. So Superintendent Simmons, would you care to make a comment, please?
Thank you, and Chair, through you. I didn't hear a lot of what Ms. Trant had to say, but absolutely we have also heard from concerned staff and certainly take that seriously in terms of attending to the health and safety of staff. The ministry did make the requirement known that students with special education needs who will have difficulty accessing remote learning are to attend. And in our district, we do have a fairly robust specialized program class model. And we made the decision that the students requiring our highest level of support through specialized program classes would have the ability to attend in order to have their needs met. In terms of ongoing work, we do continue to liaise with our partners in Ottawa Public Health to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to provide the appropriate PPE and safety measures for our staff as they work with our most vulnerable learners.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Simmons. And I'm really sorry to do this, but Jean messaged me and said she had some difficulties getting her hand raised. So I let her go ahead, but Unfortunately, because we have further business, we're going to have to wait till new business, and then we can entertain the rest of the questions if that's okay. And as I said, we'll have that one question and response, and we're going to move on to item 7.2. So item 7.2, report 21-002, facilities renewal program and school condition improvement. I'd like to call upon the director to introduce the report.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, I will go directly to CFO Carson to ask him to introduce the report. And he is also present to entertain questions as they might arise. CFO Carson, please.
Mr. Chair, Dan Bradley, our manager of facilities, is also with me, and Dan will be providing a brief presentation and discussion of the report and helping to respond to questions. Before I turn it over to Dan, though, I do want to just remind people of the extent of the work that we do. We have a property portfolio with buildings whose replacement value is somewhere in the $2.5 to $3 billion range. We have 140 very diverse sites of varying ages and construction. Due to the strong advocacy of this board, of OPSPA school boards across the province, previous governments and this one have significantly increased the dollars being made available to deal with infrastructure. When we take that commitment and we add on to it the additional infrastructure dollars being provided by the federal government and the provincial government as part of their efforts to kickstart the economy, we see that there is probably more money available than we will be able to expend in the current year. As we've identified before, in the interest of not getting in the way of student achievement and student learning, we try not to infringe and do too much work during those shoulder months of June and September. And that means that we do have to be careful in how we identify the projects. The report identifies a lot of the criteria we look at, the process that we follow. This is a very complete package of work. We have to design the projects, get them completed, then provide that data back to the province, because it is the data on the condition of the buildings, the projects that have been completed, that then governs the dollars that are coming to us in the future. And we have been very successful in maximizing the dollars coming to us for those purposes. I think I can say to you that this year, of course, is complicated. When we began the planning for this, we knew that we would continue to have issues around COVID-19. And you'll note in the list of projects that a large percentage, about a third of the projects, are mechanical and electrical, to try to address not only newly emerging, but ongoing and historical challenges with our buildings. The proposed budget is a large amount, but you need to remember that we already have a backlog of work that, depending on the basis of calculation, is anywhere between $700 and $900 million. And that just to maintain a steady state and not have that number increase, you would need an annual flow of somewhere around 50 million. So we are seeing a situation where this year we can make a dent in that backlog, and we are prepared to carry out work that will provide a safer and more effective working environment for our staff, a learning environment for students. And it is a challenging process that we go through year round to try to make sure that we are ready at the right time with the right projects so that we can get the best value. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Dan, who I believe most of you have met. Dan leads our custodial, our maintenance, and our design and construction staff. And they all participate in the development of this project plan. So Dan, over to you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mike. You've covered off some of the highlights of the report. I'm just going to go through a couple other items that before we get into the brief presentation I have, just about how we go about our business. So this year's 2020-2021 FRP and SCI plan covers a 2-year period worth over $111 million. Budget includes $49 million in school condition improvement funding, $15 million in school renewal allocation, a $44 million carry forward in school condition improvement, and about 1.9 in temporary accommodation. This year's carry forward in SCI is a bit larger than usual due to the deferred projects caused by the pandemic. We carried forward roughly $20 million of projects this year that were deferred to this year. So we break down the projects into 6 major subcategories: electrical, mechanical, interior, roofing, site paving, windows, and building envelope. On the interior side, we continue to invest in the conversion of our libraries into learning commons, which provide a more modern learning environment for our students. And after a 1-year hiatus due to the pandemic, we're returning to our science lab rejuvenation program, which will resume at multiple locations across the district. This year's plan also includes the installation of 4 new net metering solar photovoltaic systems across the district. There's also information within the report about the COVID-19 Resilience Infrastructure Stream education-related projects, which is a federally supported program targeting projects intended to reduce the spread of COVID-19. This funding is not guaranteed, so we'll have to review implementation and communication once the feds provide us with any information or updates on project approvals. Okay, if you can pull up the slides now, Mike. Oh, just one sec. Right, so I just want to cover off kind of how we go about planning for the implementing of these programs. It's a multi-year plan, and that's limited because of the capacity on an annual basis within the city, availability of qualified contractors, availability of manufacturing capabilities in certain products, and competition within the city for different markets and sectors. We're one of many school boards. The city undertakes similar work. Universities, colleges undertake similar work. So we find ourselves with limited resources at times to undertake our work. So multiple sectors that are trying to do work at the same time causes pricing increases and often it's beyond reasonable levels. So we may have to defer projects due to those increases. Past several months, you've seen an increase and a focus on certain building products. So that's also had an impact on how we plan and go about our business. Next slide, Mike. So our projects are selected via a multitude of inputs. So the VFA database is the overall information where we keep all the data for every one of our schools. And that's kind of a starting point. There is a lot of hands-on feedback required by maintenance staff, feedback from operations division, life cycle plans based on static elements so we can kind of determine when we predict their life cycle and complete, and regulatory driven upgrades from different governing bodies. So there's not just one, we take a plan of the VFA database and that sets it for the year. There's a lot of planning, a lot of thought that goes into how we approach our project plans. COVID-19 has certainly had an impact, a significant impact on the construction industry. We have seen cost increases across different sectors, supply chain impacts, which impacts how we plan for our projects. You see this, for example, with bottle filling stations. We have to order them very quickly because they've changed from a 16-week delivery now to 30-week delivery. So it's impacts like that we have to be mindful of. Resource limitations, like I said before, many industries trying to take the same work. And the situation, as you know, is ever evolving. So as we saw in the spring, things are changing rapidly. So we sometimes have to change our course of action, and it could cause projects to be delayed on short notice. So I mentioned the COVID-19 Resilience Stream education-related projects funding. So this was a plan put in place by the federal government to provide up to $700 million to the province of Ontario for COVID-related projects. We're required to submit our proposed projects within a quick 2 to 3 week turnaround time. We submitted about $45 million of the projects to the Ministry of Education. They in turn selected $25.6 million out of that 45 to submit to the federal government for consideration. And we will find out apparently by the end of January how many of those projects are going ahead. We're fairly confident we should get a good bulk of those projects submitted. And if they're all approved, we're going to have to look at our resource capacity, as I mentioned before. There is a limitation within the city of how many projects we can undertake. So if you add the 25.6 million onto already $111 million plan, it's a significant amount of work to try to undertake in 2 years. There is a limitation of implementation of the COVID resilience stream funding. It has to be completed by December 31st, completed and expensed by December 31st of 2021. So there is a very tight time constraint on all that work. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, just before we turn it over, we have talked about this in the past. The 4 boards do try to, from time to time, take a look at how they could prioritize their work. We talked about it a few years ago. We were early getting out when it came to our window replacement projects, and one of the boards was unable to do any windows that summer. So to a certain extent, we do try to coordinate. That's been complicated this year because all of the boards, because of the requirements and the eligibility requirements, are looking at mechanical projects. And even before this, we had identified that there is a shortage, a severe shortage in the mechanical trades, and that from time to time we've seen, we had one project where we were using plumbers coming in from Montreal. So those are the factors that we work within. We are confident, though, that we can carry forward this project, and the plan has been developed trying to make sure that we can maximize current sources of dollars. And so, for example, when we submitted the $45 million worth of projects first to the province to go forward to the feds, some of those are projects that we will do anyway. But if we can use the federal money, then it allows us to carry forward our own money to the future for additional projects. So that's the other piece of managing this puzzle as we move forward. So, Mr. Chair, you have our recommendation there before you, and Dan and I are pleased to respond to questions.
Thank you very much, CFO Carson. And I do have a list of people asking questions. And we have a question from Ms. Granham. Is that a question with regards to report 21002?
No, it's not about this.
Okay. I will give you an opportunity later on to say what you want to say, if that's okay.
Yeah.
But we do need to move on, try to finish off some of our agenda, so I apologize. And we're going to move to Trustee Lyra.
Perfect.
I will begin by moving the recommendation, but I have a couple of things I'd like to say. I want to open by saying I'm glad to see there's $1.7 million for solar panels. I want to say, as a chemist, I'm glad to see there's money in there for science lab renewal. I do have a concern about the $84 million in accessibility backlog. We have a legal obligation under the Ontarians with Disabilities Act to make all of our buildings fully accessible, and we have a moral obligation to have done it yesterday. And I'm wondering what our timeline is like to complete that work.
Mr. Chair, just before Dan gets going, we had an audit done several years ago because we agree the timelines that are in the Act around the built environment extend where possible. We are trying to move quicker in some areas of accessibility. Some buildings are harder to do than others, but we are trying to maximize the impact of the dollars that we are spending. And I'll let Dan maybe address some of the plan in a little more detail.
Yeah, just expand on what Mike has said. We do analyze annually the needs across the district, and some are easier than others to undertake. So this year we have $1.3 million identified for accessibility upgrades. And generally speaking, these upgrades are accounted for in various sites and aren't identified within plan specifically because they come up as needs arise across the district. So, but it is something we will be looking further to in the future to expand on that, because we do have an obligation to undertake that work.
Okay, I will phrase my question a little bit more pointedly. are we going to finish all of our obligations under the Ontarians with Disability Act on time?
We'll have to review that a little closer, Trustee Lyra. I'll have to look at the timelines and the resource implications and what's involved in all the projects before I can answer that confidently.
Okay, I will come back. I will be seeking an answer to that soon. I'm a little unclear whether the $876 million backlog that you've mentioned in the report on total school repairs is before or after we've applied the $111 million that we're going to be putting in forward this year.
That would be an analysis, through you, Chair. That would be an analysis at the time the report was put together. So that would be before we undertake the $111 million.
Okay, so that means that after this work has been completed, assuming it all gets completed on time, there will be a $765 million backlog across all of our buildings.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's a bit of a difficult question to answer because it's a moving target. As we proceed through the year, more items come along in the horizon for the high and urgent need requirements. So as we do undertake that work of $111 million, we may be adding an additional, and just off the top of my head, $50 million that roll back onto that high and urgent needs list, which would bump that dollar value back up again. So as much as we like just to have an easy black and white answer, it is difficult to identify that exact, because it is a moving target.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that we will have at least $765 million in repair backlogs?
Through Chair, yes, I think that's fair to say.
If we were given a blank check by various levels of government, what is the time frame it would take to complete our entire backlog of repair history? I know that there will be stuff added to it every year. I'm wondering about the backlog specifically.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think if you look at historical work undertaken by the district, and as I mentioned, the limitations we have to undertake work on an annual basis, we're looking at, say, 50 to 60 million annually is a realistic number for us to undertake, and that's on the high end. So if you do the math, you're looking at 10 to 15 years of continuous work to eliminate that backlog, but that's not necessarily a realistic goal.
Sorry, do you mean it's unrealistic in that we're not going to get a blank check and so it will be longer and the backlog will grow, or it's unrealistic in that we're not going to be able to do this in 15 years?
No, because we continue to evolve. Every year there's more work that's added to the backlog. So as buildings age, you're going to continually have that infrastructure backlog.
Okay. What would it take to remove this backlog? I don't want to see kids in crumbling schools. I don't want to see kids in portables with steps falling apart. I don't want to see kids where the lighting fixtures are still like those old flickering horror movies. And I'm wondering, how long is it going to take, or what do we need to do to get rid of this backlog?
Mr. Chair, I think I'll begin. The backlog is a calculated number, and in some cases it identifies something that is due to be replaced, but that's not something that creates an unsafe condition. It's something that has passed we'll call it its useful life or its expected economic life. Use an example of plumbing. When in the schools that are more than, say, 50 years old, the database, the VFA database, assumes that the entire plumbing in the building needs to be replaced. We don't do that. You do it in phases, you do it in sections. There are some of those things that will not have that impact. I don't think you would ever see anyone that didn't have a maintenance backlog. This infrastructure catch-up is one that across the country, all organizations have, federal, provincial, municipal, school boards. I think we're pleased to see the progress that we are making in some of this resolution. The limiting factors we have are the nature of our business. In some cases, to get this work done and to eliminate the backlog, it means closing a school for 1 year or 2 years and relocating students. We don't always have that luxury, and so it means we have to phase the work over 3 or 4 years. There is the ongoing issue of the availability of a qualified workforce. in terms of trades and the capacity in the city. And that's why we're having trouble saying this is what it would take. It would need a structural change. When we're trying to get work done in essentially about a 10 to 12 week period, especially invasive work. It's one thing when we're doing roof repair and roof replacement work on the, you can sort of identify you're going to do a quarter of the roof this year, a quarter next year, work your way through it. If you're going to start to redo mechanical systems and ductwork, you're taking the ceiling down at the same time. You've got to be able to make sure that work all happens in a safe manner. And we don't always have we rarely have the luxury of having an empty school to work with. Those are the kinds of factors, and that's why some of these backlogs have arisen, and it's why you see institutions having to try to continue to operate while they address the backlog. I think, as Dan put in the presentation, we focus on making sure our regulatory upgrades are there. We focus on making sure that those things that have the biggest impact on health and safety are getting done. But I don't think you'll ever see us eliminate that backlog, partly because the backlog is one measure, but it's not the only way to evaluate the quality of our building portfolio. Sorry, it's a little long-winded, but it's a good question, but it's a tricky one to try to answer properly.
So you mentioned that we do most of our work in you said 10 to 12 weeks over the summer. I'm wondering, I know when they replace the Queensway, they try and do it overnight. They work people in 24-hour shifts. Do we only have contractors in for like the 9 to 5 time frame, or are we working people? Do we shift people in for 12 hours at a time or for 16, 24 hours at a time?
Depends on the project. We did an electrical upgrade at one of the schools, and between working with Ottawa Hydro and the various other utilities that were involved in that project, it was about 48 hours straight. I will say the ability to get some of this work done using overtime is not as effective as it used to be. Again, we're seeing changes in the workforce and people's willingness to work those sorts of hours. The mega projects that are designed around it are, I think, are unique projects, and they come at an additional cost, but it is not unknown. For example, we've done some mechanical projects in buildings where the work begins at 4 p.m. and they work through till midnight. It just depends on what disturbance that creates so that the building space is ready for the next morning.
Shifting gears a bit, I think it was Appendix B, you've listed a number of school things that are being upgraded. What is a backflow preventer upgrade? Because I believe every one of my schools, and I think every school is getting one, and I don't know what it is.
Mr. Chair, that was a mandate from the City of Ottawa to protect the city water infrastructure. So it just prevents any water that's within our building from going back into the system.
Okay. And then my second question is, I would like to know if there are any boiler replacements that are going to be done that are being done with fossil fuel burning boilers. I feel like we do this dance every year.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, there are a few boiler upgrades this year. Since last year's discussion, we have been reviewing how we can implement the reduction of fossil fuels. Transitioning directly to an electric system at this time is a little challenging based on we don't know how it will integrate in the system, which is a fairly easy issue to overcome. However, if we were to transition everything from fossil fuels to gas-fired to an electric system right now, our utility costs would increase by about 4.5 to 5 times compared to with the air gas. So we're reviewing that balance right now. I'm not saying we're not going to electric. We are currently reviewing intensely the heat pump route for our new schools from Half Moon Bay to Forward. for the new Riverside South Secondary School. We are reviewing that. And that's because you can get more out of the system if you look at a heat pump versus a straight electrically heated system. So yes, the current system, we are looking to replace like for like just because of the timing of the life cycle. But moving forward, we are thoroughly investigating the heat pump route so we can transition away from fossil fuels in the future.
I'm really glad to hear that our conversation around this time last year about heat pumps has stuck along. And I'd like to just echo, I believe, my comments from last year. Oh, I'm out of time, so I'm going to keep this brief, about looking at 30-year life cycles for boilers because the fossil fuel costs are going to skyrocket. Thank you so much. Those are all my questions. You don't need to put me back on the list.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. And moving on, we have Trustee Campbell.
Oh, thank you very much. Has the motion been moved, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Trustee Lyra moved it.
Okay, great, thank you. Just a couple of questions, and I very much appreciate the staff report and all the work that's gone into this and the dialogue so far this evening. I guess I'm a little bit unclear in terms of just some basic clarity on the numbers. As I understand the report and the proposed the recommendation towards the end, we're looking at 111 million plus another 45 million. They're different pots of money. Is that correct? I mean, I came up with a total of like ballpark 165, but maybe I just don't understand the basic arithmetic here.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the 111 million is part of the school renewal allocation. So that's our SRA funding and our SCI funding combined with the carry forward SCI funding. The 45.8 million is the application we have put in through the Ministry of Education, the federal government, for the COVID resilience funding, which was an unknown. We could either get 45 million or we could have got zero. We heard in between the time the report was put together till now that there was 25 million applied to the federal government out of that 45.8 million. So right now there's a potential of us getting zero or an additional 25.6 million over and above the $111 million in school renewal.
Got it. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So going back, I guess to you, Mr. Chair, perhaps to Mr. Bradley, but staff will decide. I understand from the previous dialogue that a realistic sort of high watermark for the amount of work that can be realistically done in a year might be 50 to 60 million. So the 111 million is sort of right up there. I'm assuming then, as in terms of historic numbers, at least for 2 years of work. So I guess my question is if this other money does materialize, does that therefore mean, I mean, realistically, I mean, I guess TBD, sure, but realistically, we're pushing into a third year to get all the work done?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that'd be the realistic approach. And keep in mind that the bulk of the CVRS funding projects that were applied for are renewal based anyways. So they will go against our database as well. So what we'd have to do is just carefully look at those projects that we can defer, say from the second to third year, they'll have the least amount of impact to the system.
Great, thank you very much. And I think you touched on it, but I'd just like to clarify in my own mind. With all the boards and indeed all kinds of major public sector parties spending infrastructure money like mad, and with only so many outfits to supply services and products and that kind of thing, it strikes me that prices might increase importantly. I don't know how that works, but I guess it's a common sense guess. And so I guess my question is, do we expect that these dollars will go as far over the next 2 years as we might normally expect if there wasn't a lot of, in a sense, competition for service suppliers over this period? And have we factored in possible price increases into our planning that may be related to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, when we're doing our budgeting, we take on, we analyze what we've done historically, and also they factor in the current market conditions. So there would have been a bit of an increase incorporated. We've been seeing anywhere from a 7 to 12% increase in the market, and that's just giving a ballpark estimate. Obviously, different sectors and different type of products have seen more of an increase. Steel, for example, has gone up quite significantly. You'll see mechanical systems. So we'll have to monitor our tenders as they come in, but as we move forward through this pandemic, we don't know what's going to happen. So we may have to make a judgment call whether we go ahead with these projects or not.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. And moving on to Trustee Ellis.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering if the district has ever sort of put together what it's costing us to have such high backlog. I'm thinking around, windows. We try to replace them, and when we do, they'll be more efficient. But you can always put off putting in windows. The same goes for other products as well. So just a comment from staff on if we have a handle on how much extra it's costing us in our operating budget because of these such a huge backlog.
For you, Mr. Chair, with the vast number of buildings within the district, it's hard to kind of pinpoint based on one or two criteria. We'd have to do on a site-by-site analysis of what this is, what it's costing us. We haven't done that recently, so I'd have to look into it a little further.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just in addition to that, we know that, for example, that we do see energy savings and improved comfort when we can do that building envelope work, whether it's windows or masonry or recaulk an entire building. The other measure that we have been watching though over the years is the number of instructional days we lose because of a building failure, whether it's a flood or a system breakdown. And those numbers have been remarkably low the last few years. Sometimes we usually end up with one or two that are lost because of freezing without any snow on the ground. But that is the other measure that we try to keep an eye on. And because, again, obviously one of our first concerns is to make sure we minimize the number of days that are lost to students.
Thank you. I'm aware of what an extraordinary job facilities does in keeping our buildings in shape. And I was just asking about the money component. Certainly, learning is better when lighting is better, more efficient lighting and good lighting. I'm just trying to highlight how penny wise and pound foolish we may be in not appropriately taking into account the life cycle of our stock, or actually the province not taking into account that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Ellis. And now moving on to Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one question, and that relates to Appendix C to the report, what is listed as page 7 of 19, if you're looking just at that appendix. The multiple items regarding hold open devices for fire doors. I'm just curious to know what exactly that is. Having always believed that fire doors were mostly intended to be shut, and wondering if this is something that would hold them open so as to allow for more air circulation within the buildings.
Through you, Mr. Chair. These projects are hold open devices for fire doors that are required to remain closed for fire separations, but are allowed to be open if they can be closed in the event of a fire. So the intent of this, and it was an improved project under the COVID funding, was to reduce touch points. So the more doors that are propped open, the less points people have to touch and to clean.
Thank you very much for that explanation.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. Moving on to Trustee Bell.
Thank you very much. I also want to extend my gratitude to CFO Carson, who spent a good time answering all of the questions I had about this package, because there is a lot to learn as a new trustee. The one question that I do have for public is, when looking at prioritizing the projects for this year, how did we apply a COVID lens when we're looking at ventilation systems and the types of measures we need in place to ensure that our schools are safe? How did we prioritize that in the entire package of projects? Thanks.
Just before Dan can speak to the details, I think this year that was one of the leads, and it was one of the conditions we looked at. So we've used the examples of the bottle filling station. We've used the example of increasing the number of the hold open areas so that we can, wherever possible, reduce the touch points. Same thing with some of the things in the washrooms and faucets. Ventilation was also is always a priority every year. Air quality has been a priority for the last 20 years in school boards across the country. In some cases, we aren't able to do as much as we would because of the time frames, but I think it's fair to say you're seeing the impact of safety in this area of the pandemic taking more of a lead role than it would have in the past. Some years we'd have had more structural work. Dan, I think you had a couple of examples you can point to.
Sure, through you, Chair. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, for sure. We had, as we were planning for this year's projects, we certainly looked towards the ventilation side. We started reviewing our ventilation systems well before the province had made that original announcement for funding. So that gave us the ability to identify those problem areas. And so we've identified some of the spaces we need to upgrade ventilation. So it certainly was in the forefront for staff when they were reviewing the projects and implementing those. So ventilation, the bottle filling stations, upgrading water fountains, all the projects identified within the CBRIS funding obviously had that lens in mind. So those will also be transitioned. For those projects that aren't within the FRP plan, most likely we will transition many of those projects, if they aren't approved, over to the FRP SCI side over the years.
That's it for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Bell. And Trustee Ellis, did you have something further comment or question? Your hand is still up.
Yeah, no, sorry.
No problem. And we're moving back to Trustee Lyra for a wrap up. Sorry, I just had a hand up here from Sela Lamba. Did you have a question?
Yes, I did. It's maybe more of a question that for a learning moment for me. How do you actually, again, I'm the representative for ACE, so my question is around a human rights issue. So how do you determine, like, is there a place where where there's a list of accessible schools and non-accessible schools, and how do you determine a school is accessible or not? And the reason why I'm asking that question is because I would think that this would be a priority, not only because of the Ontarians with Disabilities Acts and the obligations under there as a service provider, but also under the Human Rights Act, right? Because, you know, it's quasi-constitutional, it should always be a priority. So I'm just, from my own knowledge, how does that work?
Dan?
As through Chair, as Mike had mentioned previously, we did an audit several years ago, so that list has been documented. As far as published, I'll have to go back and review that with Mike. I'm not sure where that information is published. Mike, I'm not sure if you're aware.
I think there's a few pieces to it. We have several schools that are not 100% accessible. You know, we have had schools where without an elevator, and we have managed to support students or staff by making sure at least the entrance to the school is accessible, that a proper washroom is on the ground floor, and that we've been able to accommodate the students that way. Those are temporary fixes. And in one case, it took 10 years before we were able to get to a project that provided an elevator to the second floor. And it was managed, with the cooperation of the school, of the principal, of teaching staff, some of whom had to move through different classrooms than they might have to make sure that the family was able to participate. The example I'm thinking of, in fact, was a parent, not a student, and we wanted to be able to manage it. We have some schools that are closer to being 100%. Well, we have some that are 100% accessible. I don't believe we have any that are 0%, but there's certainly some schools are more difficult than others. And in those cases, we are sometimes have to take a look at the students' needs and say, we're going to have to find a way to accommodate you at the neighboring school. And that is a process that's worked through with the student, their family, the principals, and the superintendent of instruction to make sure that we can manage that effectively. There are some buildings where, as I said, the access to the buildings is usually the easy part. It's the vertical up to the second floor that is certainly more complicated to put in place, especially when we want to try to maintain everyone's dignity. So it is, we did have a list that was published a few years back. We can round that up though.
I just have a follow-up question. So being on ACE and here the last time, I know there's like a human rights roadmap, an equity roadmap. So my question is, how are you using an equity lens or whatever the terminology might be, human rights lens, in this work when you're thinking of putting this together?
I think the big thing for us is that we look at ways that the community needs certain resources. There are some communities that have greater need of a resource in a building than other schools would. So that if we are in a community that does not have access to a city community center, or they don't have access to some of those recreation facilities, we might in fact upgrade or move further or sooner with some of our improvements to things like the library, the gym, those spaces that are used by the community, because we know we're the only game in town. And so we do try to take that into account. We also look at it from some of the requests that have come through over the years with respect to cultural changes. Years ago, we began putting in and recognizing the need to support schools in providing spaces for prayer. And so those are issues that our team works through with the support of individual schools, the superintendents of instruction, and some of the specialized system leads in program and learning, or in adolescent learning, or in Dorothy Baker's group that's focused on equity. So it really is a team project when we can look at how the changes we can make in a school will have a positive impact on the community as well as the kids.
Thank you. Those were my questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And we're going back to Trustee Lyra for a wrap up.
We've had a thorough debate, none required.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to call the question on the recommendations, Part A to Part E. All those in favor? And opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. So moving on to reports, and maybe we can get through this quickly so we can get to some other important work here. So reports from statutory and other committees. I'd like to call for a mover to confirm the Advisory Committee on Equity minutes of the November 26, 2020. Anyone? The ACE minutes from November 26. Trustee Jenkins, thank you very much. Are there any errors and or omissions? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question this. All those in favor of accepting those minutes? And opposed? And that passes. Moving on, SEAC of December 9th, 2020. I'd like to call for a mover to confirm the Special Education Advisory Committee minutes of December 9th, 2020. Trustee Campbell, thank you very much. Are there any errors and or omissions? Trustee Boothby, is there?
Yes, Chair, there were 3 errors that I raised at the SEAC meeting. Do you want me to go through those again or just suffice that they were raised at SEAC?
Suffice that they were raised at SEAC, if that's okay with you.
It's fine with me, and the meeting minutes will be augmented to reflect those changes.
All right, so I'm assuming they're going to be amended. So all those in favor of accepting the SEAC minutes of December 9th as amended? Opposed? And that passes. The Indigenous Educational Advisory Council minutes of December the 10th, 2020. I'd like to call for a mover. Trustee Huff, thank you very much. Are there any errors and or omissions? Trustee Bell?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I'm wondering if it would make sense to include my name as Wendy's alternate for this meeting in the front end of the minutes. And then I have one addition, which is on page 8, the second paragraph regarding a motion to bring forth and a motion to put forth an Indigenous trustee position on the board. On the last sentence, it says he maintained that there are a large number of students who attend the OCDSB and therefore a change could be implemented. What I'm requesting is he maintained that there was a large number of, can we add Indigenous students who attend the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board and therefore. Is that clear?
Yep.
Great, thanks.
So did you receive that amendment, Executive Officer Drew? I'm assuming you did.
Yes, sorry, I did.
Okay, thank you very much. And any additional errors and or omissions to those minutes? Seeing none, I'd like to call a question on receipt of those minutes. All those in favor? And opposed? Thank you, and that passes. And finally, the Extended Day Child Care Program minutes of December 3rd, 2020. Can I have a mover? Trustee Ellis, thank you very much. Are there any errors and or omissions to that report? And seeing no one put their hand up, I'd like to call the question on receipt of those minutes. All those in favor? And opposed? And that passes. Thank you very much. Moving on to matters for discussion, item 9, report 20-115, specialized program class referral information, 2020-2021. I'd like to call upon the director to introduce the report.
Through you, Chair. Superintendent Simmons is here, who will introduce the report and provide responses for questions as they emerge. Superintendent Simmons.
Thank you, and Chair, through you, I am joined by Manager Kay, who will be leading us through this report. This is an annual report that we bring to trustees to talk about the specialized program class referral info that we have to date from the previous year. Just for your reference, because we are new to this report, we did provide in the appendix similar charts from last year, as you're going to see in this report, as Manager Kay walks us through. So I'll turn it over to Manager Kay.
Through you, Chair, and thank you, Superintendent Simmons. Building on Superintendent Simmons' introduction, this is our second year providing this annual report. And it's important throughout the discussion of the data to highlight the fact that it does represent a snapshot of data that is taken on the 30th of October, 2020. One of the changes from the previous edition of this report was the move from the snapshot of data from the end of June through to October, which we felt better represented the complement of our specialized program classes over the course of the school year. During our spring specialized program class referral process, a total of 633 referrals were reviewed by our referral review committees. This does represent a slight increase over the previous 2019.
It's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence.
I will continue. With that, I will draw your attention to Table 1 on Folio 52, which represents our data for our elementary specialized program classes. As you can see, from 10 of our 12 types of elementary specialized program classes, we had low or no wait lists across those classes. There were two notable exceptions. Those did include autism spectrum disorder classes, as well as our learning disability specialized intervention program, which as of October 30th of this year of 2020, we're carrying wait lists. With respect to the snapshot of data, I think it is important that over the course of a school year, students certainly do move in and out of our specialized program classes. So by example, we have had an additional 7 students join our LD SIP classes since this data was collected, further reducing the number of students on that wait list. As we move to Table 2 and taking a look on Folio 53 of our secondary specialized program class data, ostensibly we were not carrying wait lists for our secondary specialized program classes as of October 30th of this year. We did complete a further analysis of our 2 elementary specialized program classes that did have the more significant wait lists. So both with respect to autism spectrum disorder classes and our LD SIP classes, we did take a look at the geographic distribution of students presently on that wait list. And that analysis did show that those students were evenly distributed across the 5 geographic zones of our district. So as has been previously reported, based on anticipated student needs, the district has been able to minimize students waiting for specialized program classes through the practice of adding additional specialized program classes. This September, we did open an additional 8 specialized program classes, 5 at elementary and 3 at secondary. This is building on the 14 additional specialized program classes that were opened in September of 2019. LSS did not recommend opening specialized program classes to accommodate all areas of anticipated need. because we did feel that there were alternative strategies to providing support for these students within the regular class. With the example of our students presently waiting for autism spectrum disorder classes, we do have itinerant teachers as well as educational assistants and professional support staff that are dedicated to providing additional support for this group of students. Likewise, a similar structure is available for those students waiting for LD-SIP placements. Certainly in recent years, with the management of those waitlists and the significant increase in total numbers of specialized program classes, there are significant operational considerations to be looked at. Certainly finding space for new specialized program classes in a way that is equitable across the district is something that we have spent a lot of time to consider. And increasingly, it is becoming more difficult to find spaces in our school sites, as those schools that do have room to accommodate additional classes often have a significant number of classes at the current time. The second piece of this analysis does take a look at students at our professional assessments. Due to the impact of the school closure last spring, due to the results of the pandemic, this data was not able to be collected. However, Learning Support Services is carefully looking at the number of professional assessments that have been completed across this year and the number of students that are continue to wait for professional assessments. And as we better understand this information, we will certainly be coming forward with additional recommendations. So I will close with that and pass it over to Superintendent Simmons for any additional comment.
Just to thank you, Manager Kay. The only thing I would add is that our current process for gathering data as it relates to professional assessments is manually driven. We are hopeful as we continue to work towards a technology solution that data may be more readily available than having to turn to staff, which we couldn't do or didn't feel we could do while staff were dealing with the continuity of learning in the spring. But happy to take any questions now and do our best to respond.
Thank you very much. And we have Trustee Boothby.
Thanks. I just have one question. So I understand the concern about the geographic location of classes and how that's most desirable given travel time for kids. But I'm wondering, are there other distinct advantages possibly of locating multiple more specialized program classes in the same sites? So might we get economies of scales with things like we have less travel time for SLPs, for learning support consultants and other spec ed limited resources that we have?
Chair, through you, there might be some economies of scale when it comes to staff mileage and those kinds of things, but we do know that the addition of specialized program classes does create additional workload at each of the individual sites. We have noted that, for example, with our ASD classes, that when there's just one at a site, sometimes they benefit from having an additional program to collaborate and to engage in that kind of economy of scale that you're talking about. But we do continue to hear challenges brought forward. For example, we have sites with 8 and 10 specialized program classes, in addition to being located in areas or schools that are already have a higher level of need based on RAISE index or what have you. So there are those challenges as well as we try to make sure we get programs into schools equitably. The other factor is that we do want to minimize the transportation that kids are experiencing, or the time on transportation that kids are experiencing. We don't want kids traveling an hour each way to get to a congregated site. So while there might be some advantages to having a host site, we are very concerned about the additional strain that it puts on the overall school community when large numbers of these specialized program classes with students who are receiving our highest level of support are congregated in one setting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And moving on to Trustee Campbell.
Thank you very much. Great report. Appreciate it. Following up on Trustee Boothby, perhaps taking a bit of a different slant on it, but going to your excellent guiding questions at the end of the report there. I guess, and I'm showing my length with the DSB perhaps to a certain extent, but way back some time ago when the Special Education Policy Ad Hoc Committee made its recommendations, specialized classes were supposed to get priority placement when it came to school accommodation decisions. And to me, student need outweighs the fact whether you're going to have pop an extra portable out on the yard. So you may have a school which is overburdened in terms of utilization, but a need is a need. And to the superintendent's point, you don't want people traveling a long time. In fact, that's why we don't take other students from that community and send them a long time someplace else, but rather increase the school utilization. I mean, and I guess the question is, do you want special education kids broadly from that community to remain within that community? And ideally, yes. So I guess I think part of the question goes to whether we are actually following through and according priority placement of special education classes when we make accommodation decisions. And I guess what I'm reading between the lines is maybe not, or maybe not as perhaps as much as we could. So that's perhaps a consideration, maybe a discussion for a future time, not in our few remaining minutes to this evening, perhaps. And maybe we need to double down on that in terms of that commitment as a board and a district. In terms of the guiding question, though, at the end, in terms of number of specialized classes and pressures and looking at alternative models and methods supporting students, to me, if we're clearly meeting the QPI that you folks have established in a convincing and persuasive way with all alternative methods of delivery, then sure, why not do that? It sort of goes to KPI, which I wish we had, because then you'd be able to prove or demonstrate that an alternative model yielded the same or better benefits. Unfortunately, we can't do that. So things have to be by anecdote. But I think that if we had, if it was a convincing addressing of at least what hopefully our agreed QPI, sure, do alternative models. But then I would look at not just those areas where we seem to be encountering increasing demand and pressures, but really all of our exceptionalities where we have alternatives. I assume as a trustee that if a placement decision is made for a specialized program class, that's because it has been determined that that is what is needed to address the student's needs. If that's not the case, then sure, I think we have to reconsider our placement decisions. More of a comment than a question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. And we're moving on to Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having seen and been part of the evolution of special education in Ottawa-Carleton, and coming from an original position where the expectation was that students in need of specialized placements were expected to be there for intensive support and learning opportunities with a view to transitioning them back into a regular class placement when they had managed to acquire the necessary skills to be able to handle a regular class placement successfully. I guess the question I have is, do we have any data, and I don't anticipate necessarily an answer tonight, to indicate our students who are moving into a specialized class placement are getting the intensive support that they need in order to transition back out of that placement again, so that they are not there. A specialized class is not a life sentence for them, but rather we are in fact supporting them to acquire the skills they need to thrive in other environments.
Chair, I can provide a little bit of a response to that. In some cases, yes, students are transitioning out back into the regular program. And a few years ago, when we introduced our LD SIP model, that was a key factor that we wanted to look at, build self-advocacy, some skills to be able to support their learning while having a learning disability, including building in time to practice those skills while they are within the support of an LD SIP classroom. But we're also noting that, for example, in our ASD classrooms, we are seeing higher numbers of profound needs in those classrooms, and transitioning out is less likely in those situations, that the presenting needs continue to be profound on an ongoing basis throughout their career with the OCDSB. Similarly, for some of our students with developmental disabilities. So in some case, with some exceptionalities, there's more success in returning students to the regular program. In others, student success is best achieved within a specialized program class.
At some appropriate point down the road, I would really appreciate having some of those data provided if we are looking at the model we're currently using. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. Moving on to Trustee Ellis.
Yes, thank you for the report. Now, is there something similar to, for people? I know there's the reports, a wait list for those who are waiting to be assessed by some of our more professional staff. Staff with other qualifications. Is there a similar thing for the in-class services? I'm thinking around Empowered, but also just so that as a district, we have a handle on what kind of resources we need to bring to bear for the spec ed student in the regular class?
Chair, through you, we are joined also by System Principal Kessler, who is our lead with Empower. And I'll ask her to talk about some of the data that we have as it relates to Empower.
Excuse me, that's fine. That wasn't the question I asked. I'm familiar with the Empower. I used it because that's a very standalone program that is brought to bear on students in a regular class setting. Predominantly, I use it just as an example. So, there's also other interventions such as withdrawal for students with behavioral issues. How are we meeting all of the demands? Do we have enough to meet all of those students' needs in the classroom? And I'm just putting that out as an example. And so the question I'm asking, is there such an analysis at the district of needs in the regular classroom that are being deferred?
Chair, through you. So I think what I'm hearing the trustee ask is how quickly are schools able to access different levels of support at the school level for a student who's experiencing some challenges in being
what I'm
successful?
asking, sorry, yes, that's when that situation arises, do we track, well, it would be good if it started right at the beginning of September, but we're not going to be able to bring those until mid-November.
At schools, many schools do have student of concern meetings as they try to figure out what levels of support and what strategies can be put into place. And those start right away. So if an educator is experiencing, is noticing that a student is having some challenges, and they take their steps that are within their existing toolkit to support that learner, and the student still continues to struggle, they can access the learning support teacher very quickly by walking down the hall and having a conversation. There are regularly scheduled multidisciplinary team meetings as well at each school, and they happen a little less frequently, but there are opportunities there for a more formal conversation to happen. So, for example, you might be able to get some suggestions from a speech and language pathologist that you can then implement and apply in the class level to address whatever the specific issue it is. We don't currently track the time that it takes from beginning to end because the intervention starts right away. Teachers, educators are working to support learners every step along the way, whether it's checking with previous teachers, speaking with learning support teachers, learning support consultants are around and in the schools. So there is a variety of supports that are available that allow those steps to occur.
Well, and I'm sure my colleagues will agree with me or have had similar situations. I hear from folks whose children aren't getting the support as outlined in their IEPs. And it's been troubling for quite a number of years that the district doesn't have a handle on that. It's as anecdotal as me saying I've heard of it in response. I'd also like to, forgive me, the package I'm working on didn't have the me project and the delegations in it. So I think it would be page 55 plus 42 would be 97, folio 97. Under resources implication, number 4, it speaks to the costs to the district of having specialized classes. And most of these specialized classes that we're adding are for the autism ASD spectrum. And, you mentioned it in the opening remarks by staff that it's hard to transition, or in response to a question from Lynn Scott, hard to transition back. I'm just pushing back at that it exceeds the spec ed's grants that we get. But if we are true to our equity lens and wanting to do that, that shouldn't matter. The province doesn't fund us appropriately, but from an equity position, we need to support these students. And that goes to the same as to Rob Campbell point about when a class is needed, we should open a class. I see my time's up. Thank you. I'm done.
Chair, if I just might add to that, I think we also have to examine various support models that might help go about supporting that learner in being successful. So there are some various options that are yet to be explored, but absolutely the district is committed to a continuum of programs and services for students with special education needs.
Thank you very much. And with that, that's the last comment on that. Let's move on to report 20-110, and we have a very limited amount of time. So if you could,
Trustee, Mr. Chair, I believe Seema Lambda has her hand up for this.
Yes, just popped up. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Seema.
Thank you. So it's kind of like a follow-up. The one thing that sometimes we've talked about on our committee is the fact that it's the students with disabilities, and I would call these disabilities, tend to be the ones that are disciplined, right? And it could be perhaps because they don't have the support system, that are needed, even though the school board wants to provide that. So I'd be curious to know in some of these categories what the discipline rate is as well, right? Of students, if they're being, if there's some kind of repercussions for their behaviors that might be coming out of their behaviors, I guess. And then the other question that I have, that was a comment. So I don't know if you can speak to that or not. And my other question was with respect to how are the cultural needs of these students addressed with these programs? Is that taken into consideration when these programs are set up?
So Chair, to the first question, there is an annual suspension report that the district prepares, which talks about some of the discipline decisions that are taken as it relates to students with special education needs. I think that came in October of this year for the previous year's data. I can't remember for sure off the top of my head. As it relates to the cultural programming, we continue to work to ensure that we're applying that equity and human rights lens to the work that we're doing. Learning Support Services has definitely benefited from our partnership with our equity department and certainly engaged in that work as a department, both with our educator staff and our professional support services staff, as we work to continually embed that in our day-to-day practice or specialized program classes. But frankly, there is more work to be done. We know that we can forge more partnerships as we move forward and try to address that in a more meaningful way as we work to support the programming in our specialized program classes.
Okay, so just as a follow-up, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of the October report. But do you look at that when you're looking at when you're looking at what you're doing with, when you're putting down like 102 students are with the ASD in the secondary school? Do you look at like 10 of those are actually being disciplined? And so maybe there's some work that needs to be done. Maybe that's what the October report covers. So this is just data. Okay.
Absolutely, we do look at that. It's one of the things that our multidisciplinary teams do is try to examine, if we look at behavior as communication, what is the behavior communicating to us? What's the underlying need that's not being met? And our multidisciplinary teams try to work to pick that apart so that we can actually get precise to the specific need of that child. But it is an ongoing piece of work because each student is unique and each student has varying needs. So it's not a precise science, but it is an ongoing discussion in an effort to get there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to discussion report 20-110, update on supports for students with giftedness.
Through you, Chair, this is a report also led by Superintendent Simmons. So I'll turn it directly to Superintendent Simmons at this time.
Thank you. And Chair, through you, I will try to go quickly through the report, but trustees will be reminded that in 2018, there was a motion to direct staff to go out on a pilot for our guide for supporting gifted students in the regular classroom and the OCDSB Interest Academy. Those pilots involved providing professional learning to staff, identifying schools, providing the resources to staff, which we engaged in the spring of 2019. And then carrying on into the subsequent year, we had a number of challenges as it relates to conducting those pilots. So back to September 2019, while we'd identified in the spring and engaged in professional learning, movement of students resulted in a need to adjust schools and to reevaluate which staff members we would have in place to participate in the learning as it related to the guide to supporting students with giftedness and the Interest Academy. And then shortly thereafter into September, in the fall of 2019, we experienced further challenges with respect to being able to replace teachers for professional learning. There was labor action, and then of course the COVID-19 pandemic came in and drew things to a halt. However, throughout all of those, we were gathering anecdotal feedback as it relates to the two resources. Feedback as it related to the OCDSB Guide to Supporting Students with Giftedness was not favorable. Staff were reporting to us that they didn't find it a meaningful resource. They found it difficult to use. It was a paper resource in a binder format. So there were a number of challenges as it related to content and format. With respect to the Interest Academy, anecdotal feedback indicated that staff felt there were connections across curriculum and that they could make use of it in their program and planning. And it allowed for improving connections between peers. So this memo provides an update as it relates to both those pilots, because we think based on what we know now, we should be shifting gears a little bit. A piece of work that began last spring, and Trustee Campbell mentioned our QPI, our Quality Program Indicators document. It was released in 2012. There's been a need to update that for some time, as the original document was designed explicitly for specialized program classes. And we now know with the students that we support a wide variety of students with varying exceptionalities in the regular classroom. So the document needed to be updated to present more of a broad scope of students with special education needs and the various models in which they're supported. So we started to update that document, and there was a subsequent memo that we took to SEAC this month that explored that a little bit more. But the intent of the revised document is to ensure school teams understand the high expectations for academic programming, the instructional strategies, learning environments, individual education plans, quality individual education plans, and so on, by exceptionality, as well as a more overarching general statement as it relates to special education. Really, we were using that document to try to get to a consistent and shared understanding of effective supports for students with special education needs. So with that as the philosophy, staff started working on a Google site to be able to provide this in an electronic format, much in the same way special education in Ontario is developed, so that it can be updated, links can be live. It's not a paper document, and in a COVID time, having an electronic document is a little bit of an advantage. So our recommendation is to not continue with the pilot for the OCDSB guide as originally envisioned, but to shift gears towards a learning support for students with special education resource, because we're not getting solid feedback in relation to the other guide with the original guide. As it relates to the Interest Academy pilot, that is a joint venture with our partners in program and learning. And we see a real advantage this year, having started in virtual schools, that we have access to a number of students in a different location that we wouldn't necessarily have within one site. So we're proposing that we actually revisit that pilot with the OCV campuses and expand the ages, so including students from grades 4 to 8, as we work to understand whether the OCDSB Interest Academy is something that we can then turn our eyes to, first improving based on feedback and then scaling up to a broader system rollout. Obviously, the evaluation plan would need to be updated accordingly, but the cross-departmental work has been ongoing in that venture to try to bring it forward. Chair, I'm just conscious of the time, and do you want me to pause here, or do you want me to keep going?
We do have to have a pause to have the 10:30 vote. If we do not, if the vote does not succeed, then we'll find a time to continue this discussion, if that's okay with you, Superintendent Simmons. But if it does, then you can continue. So right now, I believe we need 2/3 to agree. So all those in favor of continuing past 10:30? And opposed? And it looks like we are not going to continue past 10:30. So what I'm going to suggest is the 2 remaining reports, which are important reports, that we find a time perhaps during board to bring up for discussion, because they are worthwhile to discuss, and we were not given the proper amount of time to, or that we didn't have enough time to discuss them. And I'm wondering if we're going to raise that at agenda planning tomorrow, see if we can get it in. So with that, I guess the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.